Hello everyone! Good evening! Welcome to the ano ba tayo? Episode 11 of the 2022 World War II Lecture Series. I can't believe it's already November. Patapos na yung taon. It's already episode 11. And parang kailan lang mo, pinaplano pa lang namin itong World War II Lecture Series. So this lecture series is brought to you by the Filipino American Memorial Endowment or FAME and the Philippine World War II Memorial Foundation or Philwar. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Last week pa dapat to itong episode but because of Typhoon Paeng, we had to postpone. And mabuti naman po kasi maraming nag-message sa atin na walang kuryente sa kanila o di kaya ako nabaha. So at least hindi na putol yung momentum. So we're back now tonight for this episode. So thank you all for tuning in. I'd like to say hi to a few friends who's watching. Vic Torres, Dr. Vic Torres of DLSU, history professor at DLSU. Dr. Rico Jose of UP Diliman, thanks for watching. Our good friends, Tony Ferredo, mga World War II, experts. Tony Ferredo, Rino Francisco is watching also. Mr. Dan Hardiman, hi, hello. Melvin Lam of the Bayanihan Collectors Club. Napakarami pong ni Melvin na World War II paraphernalia that he collects. Talagang collector siya ng not just World War II but a lot of other historical, even pre-colonial Spanish relics, Spanish colonial relics. So yun po. So welcome to the episode 11 of the 2022 World War II lecture series. And tonight we're bringing you a topic hardly explored. Hindi po masyado siya napapag-usapan. In fact, maraming katanungan when we posted about this episode. A lot of messages came in. Ang daming mga tanong na gusto ma-clarify ng mga tao, including how did the church, what did the church do during that time? Were there church martyrs? Did they fight? Were they part of the underground or the resistance? So masasagot po yan ngayong gabi. And we are endeavoring to bring you a very comprehensive history of the church during World War II. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight. He is an independent researcher on the history of Catholicism in the Philippines. He received his Bachelor of Arts from the University of the Philippines, Manila, and proceeded to serve in various institutions and committees, including as Assistant Executive Secretary of the CBCP Episcopal Commission on Culture and Director of the Metropolitan Theater. His fields of specialization is the Catholic Church in 20th century Philippines, having published various monographs and in other publications on consecrated life in the Philippines, as well on the history of papal representation in the country. Friends, help me welcome our speaker for tonight, Brother Aaron Ricardo Veloso. Mic is yours, Brother Aaron.
Thank you very much, ma'am, and thank you again to the Philippine World War II Foundation and the Filipino American Memorial Endowment for inviting me to speak tonight. I am a bit terrified to see the very prestigious names joining us tonight but I'll try my best to satisfy the task given to me, that is to speak on the Catholic Church in the Philippines under the Japanese occupation. When I started writing about the history of the Catholic Church, I was very particular that I wanted to write about the 20th century Catholicism in the Philippines, a post-Spanish era. Particularly because I felt that very few literature exists. A lot of writers have focused on the church during the Spanish occupation, but the 20th century Philippine church actually is a lot more exciting for me because of various internal and external shifts that shaped the church in that period, including changes in the political landscape in the country, economic upheavals, downturns, the desire to shape Filipino identity and nationhood, and of course, the desire of the church to be more relevant to modern times. Throughout history, we have seen the church's response to these shifts and change through a reshaping of ministry, a renewed emphasis on Catholic action, and a genuine desire to build a truly Filipino church. it is in this context that I tackle the history of the Catholic Church under the Japanese occupation, looking at the church as being at the crossroads of change and development, suddenly interrupted by the Second World War. We will look at this history from the point of view of Monsignor Guglielmo Piani, SDB, a Salesian of Don Bosco, apostolic delegate to the Philippines from 1922 to 1948. In fact, the longest serving papal representative in the country. Now, the choice to look at the church from the point of view of the apostolic delegate is a deliberate one. Before the Second World War, bishops' conferences, yung katulad ng CBCP, in the form that we know today, have not yet existed. In most cases, papal representatives, or in our case for tonight's discussion, the apostolic delegate, becomes the guarantee of unity in the local church and harmonizes the apostolates and activities within its area of jurisdiction. The apostolic delegate monitors and watches over the local churches, the dioceses, and the smaller groups. For example, to the bishops in the dioceses, he represents the Holy Father, the Pope, in a personal way. To the Holy See, he presents and submits information on the state of the church in the areas entrusted to him, and assures the Pope of the state of these churches. And finally, despite the absence of a diplomatic character for an apostolic delegate, he is nevertheless called upon when necessary to represent the causes of the church before civil authorities. The first papal representative in the Philippines, an extraordinary apostolic delegate, was appointed in 1899 to coincide with the negotiations between U.S. and Spain over the purchase of the Philippines and other Spanish territories. The first ordinary apostolic delegate was appointed in 1915, while the apostolic delegation was upgraded to a nunciature in the form we know today uh, in 1951 with the establishment of diplomatic relations between the Holy See and the Philippines. So if we will see, no, there have been 18 papal representatives to the Philippines since 1899. In tonight's discussion, the delegate that we are looking at is Monsignor Guglielmo, or alternatively, he also signs his name Guillermo in the Spanish translation, or William Piani, of the Salesian of Don Bosco. Unlike modern apostolic nuncios, he did not come from the ecclesiastical diplomatic corps, but rather served various ministries in his congregation in Uruguay initially and then in Mexico until he was appointed as apostolic delegate to the Philippines. That was his first mission as a bishop. He was sent here in 1922. He was ordained a bishop at the Basilica of Sacred Heart in Rome on May 14, 1922, and arrived in Manila to assume his post on November 29, 1922. Monsignor Piani is the longest-serving apostolic delegate in the country, having served in the post for 28 years. He endeared himself to the Filipinos in those years, and in fact, on the occasion of his 50th year as a priest and in his 25th year as a bishop, Pope Pius XII wrote Monsignor Piani acknowledging that under his auspices and advice, the number of dioceses increased, the number of missionaries and clerics increased. There's been a great increase in the devotion to the Blessed Sacrament and the Virgin Mary, as well as Catholic action in the country. No? And he noted very particularly that while the recent dreadful war was burning, you suffered with those good bishops and faithful so many vicissitudes and disturbances, so many dangers and anguish. So now, I will try to present the history of the church uh, by showing how Monsignor Piani went through these numerous vicissitudes and disturbances from 1941 to 1945, and by doing so, see how the Catholic hierarchy as a whole operated during that period. So we will have three parts for this presentation. First is on the relationship with the state, in particular with the Japanese military administration and the Japanese-sponsored republic, on the life of the local church, particular church personnel and their work, and finally on new peacetime, looking at the effects of the activities of Monsignor Piani and the church after the end of World War II. So now on relationship with the state. The Japanese are not new to working with the Holy See. In fact, since the beginning of the 20th century, there have been minor occasions for diplomatic exchanges between Japan and the Vatican, but this heightened especially after the occupation of Manchuria in 1931, especially because the Holy See took exception to the way that Japan treated missionaries in Manchuria during that time. And as Japan's expansionist agenda in Asia slowly took form, the Japan realized the prestige that they will attain when they have diplomatic relations with the Holy See. On the other hand, the Holy See felt that having diplomatic relations with Japan would ease some of the restrictions being felt by Catholics in Japan, especially in light of the increasing nationalist and xenophobic sentiment during that period. So in 1939, the Holy See informed the Japanese government in its interest in establishing diplomatic relations. And on January 1942, Shigenori Togo, the foreign minister of Japan, formally wrote to Monsignor Paulo Marella, the apostolic delegate in Japan, requesting that the Holy See receive an extraordinary delegate, which was subsequently acceded to by Pope Pius XII by the end of the same month. Despite protests from both the governments of the United States and the United Kingdom, who felt that the move would be seen as an implicit condonation of the recent activities of Japan in Asia, including the capture of Hong Kong, Malaya, the Netherlands, East Indies, and the Philippines. The Holy See, however, felt that formal relations with Japan can be leveraged to protect Catholic interests in the occupied territories. So you see that the official Vatican policy when working with Japan was that they wanted to leverage the diplomatic relations as a way to protect Catholic interests, not only in Japan but also in Japan occupied territories. So that's why we see that also resonated in the actions of Monsignor Piani during the war in the Philippines, especially even if Monsignor Piani had a general mistrust of the Japanese, he continued to negotiate and dialogue with them. The Japanese propaganda, of course, using the Catholic Church was not limited to the international scene. They realized the importance of the Catholic Church in the Philippines, and that's why even before they came to Manila, they already made plans to try to appease the church, at least in the beginning. No? Immediately after the arrival of the Japanese in the country and the establishment of the JMA, the Japanese Military Administration in the country, the Japanese authorities put up the religious appeasement operation section or the religious section of the JMA, executing a plan put forward the year before. The Catholic section of this religious section was composed of the newly named Bishop of Osaka, Monsignor Paul Yoshiguro Taguchi, three other priests, five seminarians, and six lay people, all working under the supervision of Lieutenant Colonel Narusawa Tomoji. In a nutshell, the section attempted to curry the favor of the Catholic Church in the Philippines and have the leaders of the church and try to have the leaders of the church influence the faithful in accepting the new Japanese administration. Lieutenant Colonel Narusawa, for example, in his first audience with the Archbishop of Manila, described their mission as such. No? The Japanese army came to establish peace and prosperity for the Filipinos, and that the army would like to do everything possible to put an end to their sufferings. That Japan was determined to put an end to the exploitation of the Far East by America and Britain. That he would like to meet with all the bishops and the archbishop, that he would like that they would respect the religion of the people, and that the people would be given liberty to practice it, that the clergy would not be placed in concentration camps, and that the Japanese desired and expected the cooperation of all bishops and priests for the realization of the co-prosperity sphere in Greater Asia. Despite the seeming genuine desire of the members of the Catholic unit to be of assistance to the local church, these activities, of course, of their unit were used by the Japanese military administration as propaganda material, often ending up in the front page of Japanese sponsored newspapers, particularly the Tribune, during that period. At this point, it would be good to mention some details about Bishop Taguchi. He was a priest of the Archdiocese of Tokyo and a prominent figure in Japan. holding many important positions in the church, among them being secretary of the Apostolic Delegate in Japan, as well as serving as advisor for the Manchurian Papal Representative from March to December 1934. He was also editor-in-chief of the Tokyo Central Catholic Publishing Department and later head of the Okasa Shikoku Diocese. He became a bishop in November 1941 and was ordained bishop the succeeding December. In fact, this was not the first time that Monsignor Taguchi came to the Philippines. In 1937, during the International Eucharistic Congress in Manila, he was the head of the delegation coming from Japan. Many in the Philippines, including Father Hurley, the Jesuit superior, and Archbishop of O'Doherty, the Archbishop of Manila, felt that the Japanese were attempting to have O'Doherty replaced by Taguchi as Archbishop, and thus often treated the bishop with a certain level of mistrust and contempt. Even the Holy See was alarmed by his presence in the Philippines and felt the need to formally clarify to the United States government that Monsignor Taguchi went to the Philippines under the auspices of the Japanese government on his own volition, and that the Holy See has not thought of or is not thinking of replacing O'Doherty. Archbishop Yanni, meanwhile, was more constructive in his reports to the Holy See regarding Monsignor Taguchi. He noted the value of the presence of the Monsignor in the Philippines, noting that the bishop was able to help espouse the works of the church in the country and promote goodwill between Japanese occupying forces and the Catholic Church. In fact, Bishop Taguchi drafted the policy of the Japanese High Command with regards to relations with the church in the Philippines, which generally focused on three matters. First, on religious propaganda in the church. Second, on religious instruction in public schools. And third, the signing of a concordat or a modus vivendi between the Holy See and Japan. Of course, this is coming from the experience of Taguchi during the Japanese intrusion in Manchuria in the 1930s. Under the lead of Colonel Narusawa, who took the initiative of making contact with the church leaders in the Philippines, the first part of the plan, which is the religious propaganda the plan of the Catholic unit, was quickly commenced. Immediately, he held meetings with the apostolic delegate, who, according with the Tribune, was not able to be present initially. It was represented by his secretary and Bishop Madriaga of Lingayen, and then the Archbishop of Manila, and Father John Hurley, the superior of the Philippine mission of the Jesuits. This was followed by a meeting in the Archbishop's Palace composed of the Archbishop and the superiors of the religious orders in Manila. In the meetings, Colonel Narusawa emphasized again the freedom of Catholics to practice their religion and the freedom of the clergy and the religious to continue their ministry. He also asked the Archbishop to issue a pastoral statement that will be read in all churches supporting the Japanese. To this, Archbishop O'Doherty replied that while the clergy exercised authority in things spiritual, it had always been the policy to refrain from taking part in matters purely political, as enjoined by canon law. Father Hurley, who was asked by the Archbishop to add certain things, explained that if you attempt to have the church use its moral persuasion to obtain the collaboration of the Filipino people, you are choosing the worst possible means. The people will say to themselves very quietly that this is no business of the church. Other than the official endorsement from the church hierarchy, the Catholic unit also implemented several other propaganda activities to help influence the predominantly Catholic population. For example, the unit banked on other Christian connections between the Philippines and Japan. This included the holding of a commemorative mass in honor of now blessed Jesus Takayama Okon and Naito One, Christian daimyos from Japan who were exiled to the Philippines and this mass was held on September 20, 1942. The Catholic unit also sponsored friendship masses, a Japanese-Filipino Catholic conference, and established the Nippon Filipino Goodwill Catholic Association on November 7, 1942. They also brought in the Catholic Women's Religious Corps, a group of 4 nuns and 15 lay women whose main duty was to teach Japanese language and culture. All the 19 members of the corps were sent to Catholic schools around Manila and in addition to attending sociocultural events that aim to link Japanese and Philippine cultures. While the planning for the arrival was made before the religious section was dissolved on December 1942, the CWRC arrived on December 31, continuing the work of the religious section until they were eventually repatriated on February 1944. Now, on the third part of the proposal of Monsignor Taguchi regarding the Concordat or modus vivendi, the proposed agreement that he wrote was supposed to cover a number of matters, including church property, ecclesiastical jurisdiction, religious educations, and matrimonial matters. While Monsignor Piani was initially supportive of the plan, the dissolution of the Catholic unit in December 1942, as well as the difficulties of the communications with the Holy See, by the time Japan already prohibited direct communications between Piani and the Vatican, required that the negotiation and required him that to pursue the negotiation through the delegate in Japan. No? Because of that, the negotiation stalled and was no longer pursued. Upon the creation of the Philippine Executive Committee, a Bureau of Religious Affairs was also established, while the Catholic section and whatever remained of it after 1942 were reintegrated into the Japanese Army. The Bureau of Religious Affairs was in charge instead of regulating religious organizations, institute, and dioceses. So regulatory function yung main role ng Bureau of Religious Affairs. Touching, among others, registration of all institutes and their members, as well as the submission of financial records and statements of each church, institute, parish, diocese, etc. The church and the bureau had a lot of entanglements in the short time that it was established in the Philippines, no? And Archbishop Piani often had to substitute for Archbishop O'Doherty in negotiating with the bureau, including on matters that touch various aspects of Catholic life in the Philippines, including finances, conduct of processions, and educational institutions. You see there the reduction of textbooks used in schools, as well as the classification of seminaries as educational institutions, which the church opposed. Among the items in the list, none was pushed harder than the Philippinization of the Catholic Church. No, the Japanese are very particular about this. In fact, several monographs were identified in Takefumi Terada's chapter on the Catholic Church in the Philippines about the desire of the Japanese administration to Philippinize the church. In one of the monographs, Bishop Taguchi mentioned that in order to expose the true character of Catholicism, completely free of Caucasian tint and Western aspects, we must carry out effective, appropriate Philippinization within the ruling hierarchy of the Philippine Catholic Church. And you see that the church then was very vulnerable, particularly because a lot of its bishops, the most senior members of its hierarchy, were foreigners. The coming of war, 8 of the 18 bishops in the Philippines were Caucasians. O'Doherty from Manila, Jurgens from Tuguegarao, Bishop Hayes from Cagayan, Bishop McCloskey from Haro, Bishop Wracking from Surigao, Bishop Billier from Montañosa, Bishop Nieto from Palawan, and Bishop Finiman from Mindoro. And the situation, of course, is not limited just to bishops. Statistics held by the Japanese military during that time say that of the 3,901 priests, sisters, and brothers in the Philippines, 1,533 of them were actually Caucasian, so about 40%. No? It is no wonder then that the Japanese attempted to stoke the flames of nationalism in the church. In the policy drawn up by the JMA, the key points in the Philippinization of the church include the replacement of Archbishop O'Doherty with a Filipino bishop, either Bishop Guerrero or Bishop Reyes of Cebu, the systematic replacement of Filipino clergy in offices held by Caucasian clergy, including the heads of religious orders and administrators of Catholic schools, and the deportation of clergy from enemy countries. Now, it is worthy to note that the Japanese had found sympathizers within the Catholic hierarchy as well, especially because of their Filipinization bid. Most prominent among them was Bishop Cesar Maria Guerrero, a son of an affluent family in Manila, and then the auxiliary bishop of Monsignor O'Doherty. Monsignor Guerrero often graced activities of the Japanese authorities, in stark contrast to his superior, Monsignor O'Doherty, who cannot best be said to have given passive collaboration to the new administration, or the delegate, Monsignor Piani, who often held the Vatican line in working with the Japanese and was careful lest his words be twisted in government controlled media. Where O'Doherty, for example, refused to publicly state even an iota of support for the Japanese, Guerrero would publicly state his personal take, as he qualified, on the matter, saying, for example, in the early days of the occupation in 1942, that now Almighty God has decreed that our country should pass into the hands of a sister Oriental nation. The Nipponese Empire has offered us a chance to reform our national life. Let us pray to the noble company of Nipponese saints to guide and fructify the relations between their nation and ours. So the Guerreros' official family history, the Guerreros of Ermita, explained that in old age, Monsignor Guerrero said to a nephew that he was in fact mandated by Archbishop O'Doherty to be the official liaison between the Archdiocese and the Japanese. However, I find this explanation quite questionable considering that on February 1944, Archbishop O'Doherty issued a circular denouncing priests who were openly asking the government to intervene in the spiritual regime of the church and impede the free exercise of ecclesiastical jurisdiction. Uh, Especially after this was coming from President Laurel writing Pope Pius XII in January of 1944, meaning the month before, to formally request the appointment of Filipino priests to bishoprics and other positions in the Catholic hierarchy. So you see from the letter, from the circular of O'Doherty, he says, it is an open secret that certain priests have approached the government. The simple explanation, I think, can be found in the direct quote attributed by the Jesuit Father Miguel Bernad to Monsignor Guerrero. That quote is, Monsignor Guerrero was supposed to have said, when the Americans came in 1898, the Spanish clergy opposed them, not realizing they were here to stay. The Americans will never come back. We have to cooperate with the Japanese, or the church will suffer. Well, the fact is, the Japanese did find in him a supporter and one who will be extensively exploited in the Tribune, and which would cause him to be tried for assisting the Japanese in their pacification campaign and for making treasonous statements in public. So he would be among those tried for war crimes after the surrender of Japan. As a footnote to this section on the Catholic Church's relation with civil authorities, it would be worth to mention that immediately after his inauguration as President of the Republic uh, on October 1943, President Laurel, at the instigation of Japanese authorities, wrote the Pope to request that diplomatic relations be established between the Philippine Republic and the Holy See. However, on October 25, 1943, the Secretary of State, Cardinal Maglione, replied that the Holy See defers recognition of states until such time that peace treaties have been completed, mentioning that the policy of the Holy See was that states formed during wartime will not be recognized immediately. Now we move on to the second part on the life of the church. As mentioned earlier, according to the JMA, the Japanese Military Administration Statistics, and as verified with the 1942 Ecclesiastical Directory in the Philippines, there were 3,901 priests, brothers, and seminarians in the country. If we look at the breakdown, About 1,229 of these are diocesan or secular priests, while 2,762 were members of religious congregations. Of the diocesan priests, 9 were foreigners, 6 were 6 of which were military chaplains, and 3 were diocesan missionary priests. Now, of the 2,762 members of religious congregations, meaning priests, brothers, religious sisters, and seminarians, about 1,500 were foreigners: Spanish, American, British, Irish, French, Belgian, Dutch, Canadian, Australian, German, and Italian. Now, many of them were given particular mission areas in the Philippines. For example, the Dutch CICM fathers and the Dutch Franciscan sisters worked in Cagayan Valley, the Belgian father and sisters in Baguio, the Dutch Sacred Heart fathers in Surigao and Agusan, the Spanish Recollects in Palawan, the Canadian priests in Mindanao, the Italian Josephite fathers in Batangas, etc. Now, of that 1,533, 415 were nationals of the United States, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Canada, and Australia, which would mean that they are considered as enemy aliens by the Japanese. That's why in January 1942, upon the establishment of the Japanese military administration in the Philippines, the enemy aliens among the religious were initially gathered. But as agreed in the dialogue between the apostolic delegate and the religious section, they were merely registered and were allowed to be interned in religious communities. Most of the Jesuits, together with the Holy Cross and La Salette priests, were interned in Ateneo de Manila and Padre Faura. The American Maryknoll sisters and some smaller group of sisters were with the Assumption sisters in Heran. The Franciscan Missionaries of Mary and the Dutch Franciscan Missionary sisters were interned in their own convents, as well as the other congregations. No? Each internment site were given a limited number of red armbands, which were which were given to them to designate them as enemy nationals who were allowed to go around the city within the day. This allowed some priests and sisters to continue to a limited extent their ministries. Sisters during the time were particularly needed, for example, in hospitals. Now, for many religious, besides parochial work, traditional apostolates have always been education, healthcare, and social institutions. And there were plenty of them in the Philippines, particularly in Manila. The onset of war, however, made their ministries more complicated, not only because the Japanese often confiscated church properties for their own use, but because also of the other regulations and circumstances owing to the war. For example, in terms of Catholic education, uh, while the Bureau of when the Bureau of Private Schools announced that schools may reopen after July 15, 1942, this was on the condition that they apply a permit from the Bureau of Private Schools. And getting a permit will require certain conditions, which include the censorship of textbooks, the introduction of Nihongo and Japanese culture in the curriculum, and the teaching of the values of the East Asian co-prosperity sphere. Nevertheless, many institutions attempted to normalize their operations after they realized that the Japanese were here to stay. Among them, the Dominicans in UST who reopened the Central Seminary and the faculties of Medicine and Liberal Arts, Sisters of Saint Paul de Chartres, the Daughters of Charity, the Augustinian Sisters of La Consolacion, the Benedictine Sisters of Saint Scholastica's College, and the Dominican Sisters of Santa Catalina College, for the Assumption of the Assumption Convent. Also, in terms of hospitals and social welfare institutions, many continued to function as before, albeit changes in location and or administration. For example, the Hospital de San Juan de Dios had to share their facilities with another hospital, the Santol Sanatorium, or what we now know as Quezon Institute, after their their property were sequestered by the Japanese forces. At the same time, the Archdiocesan Hospital in Manila, St. Paul Hospital, was sold to UST at the start of the war and was given to the Daughters of Charity to administer. Uh, This was, of course, because USC needed St. Paul Hospital as their training facility for the Faculty of Medicine. The St. Paul de Chartres sister also continued to operate throughout the war, amazingly. The Hospital Español de Santiago in Makati, and the Singyan Clinic in San Miguel, Manila, and St. Paul Hospital in Iloilo. Now, in terms of social welfare institutions, Hospice de San Jose continued to function, although they were required to cede a part of their property for use as an extension of the Santo Tomas internment camp. During the liberation of Manila, they were evicted and they had to go to La Concordia in Santa Ana with all their wards and interns. The same also happened with White Cross Children's Home in Mandaluyong, established by several prominent women, including Doña Victoneta Araneta, uh, who were evicted from their property in San Juan in June 1944 and had to transfer to another place in Mandaluyong. Now, despite the verbal promises of the religious section to allow free exercise of religious ministry, the fact is a number of priests and religious were arrested by the Japanese military on suspicion of conniving with American and guerrilla forces. Of course, the suspicion in most cases were not unfounded. No, they really had contacts with the guerrillas, and many of them were very active in supporting American prisoners of war, including, for example, Father Theodor Battenbrock, a German Divine Word Father, who was arrested in early 1944, was convicted for his work in assisting American prisoners of war in the camps in Tarlac and Cabanatuan, was pardoned and released, but 3 months after, in November 1944, was rearrested and never seen again. The same with the three missionaries of the Immaculate Conception sisters, one of which we see on screen. Sister Adi Hebert, Sister Irene Pinsonolt, and Sister Anna Girard, who were arrested on February 1944 after one of their boarders, Mrs. Jurica, was found to have collaborated with the underground movement, and they were again uh, being accused of collaborating with the underground by providing board and lodging to Mrs. Jurica. Father Rufino Santos, or someone we all know now as Cardinal Santos, the private secretary of Archbishop of O'Doherty, was arrested also in February 1944 after he took responsibility as secretary and treasurer of the Archdiocese for giving financial assistance to American prisoners of war in Tarlac and Cabanatuan. He was convicted, imprisoned in Muntinlupa, and sentenced to death. And thankfully, he was liberated on the day that he was about to be executed by firing squad. There is also another sister, Sister Trinita Logue, a Maryknoll sister, who was arrested in 1944 on suspicion of espionage and charges and collaboration with guerrillas. She was also joined in Fort Santiago by another Maryknoll sister, Sister Mary Brigida Cayley, and also 8 Jesuits brought in for different crimes. For example, the fathers in La Ignaciana in Santa Ana, Manila, who were accused of hiding bayonets in the compound of the retreat house, and Father John Hurley, seminarians Jaime Neri and Horacio de la Costa, because of incriminating communications that show that they have a connection with the resistance force in Mindanao. Among the group, only Father Battenbrock was not found after the war. He went missing after he was rearrested in 1944. Sister Adia Bert, Father Mulry, and Neri and De La Costa were released. Sister Irene and Sister Anna were sent to Welfareville Prison. Father Santos was sent to Bilibid. Sister Trinita was transferred to the Los Baños internment camp, while the 4 other Jesuits, together with Father Hurley, were moved directly to the Santo Tomas internment camp. Now, on July 7, 1944, the enemy clergy and religious were notified that they were to be placed under protective custody as guests of the emperor. No? Yan yung official line na binigay ng mga Japanese soldiers sa kanila. And that they shall be collected the next day. So on July 8, 335 foreign missionaries were brought to camp number 2 in the Los Baños internment camp. where they will be spending the next 7 months under harsh conditions. A smaller group of 63 religious, mostly priests who were transferred from the internment camps in Tacloban, Davao, and Iloilo, were interned in Camp Number 1 in UST. The religious were interned in a section separated by high sawali walls from the rest of the camp, an area later on called as the Vatican City because they housed Catholic and Protestant missionaries. The Catholic group consisted of 2 bishops, 147 priests, 28 brothers, 29 seminarians, representing 19 and 129 religious sisters, representing 19 male religious institutes and 13 female religious institutes. The biggest in the groups were the Jesuits with 78 members, the Maryknoll Sisters with 47 members, the Dutch Sacred Heart Missionaries with 37 members, and the Franciscan Missionaries of Mary with 21 sisters. As Joint Central Committee of the Missionary Section, sorry, I'm in the wrong slide, was organized on July 9 with Dr. Ernest Stock, a Methodist missionary, as president, and with Fathers Francis Burns, Charles Taylor, Thomas Matthias Kane as assistants, and Sister Redempta Coffey as the representative of the sisters. Not long after, Bishop Yanni, using the extraordinary faculties granted to him by the Pope in 1943, created the premature null use of Los Baños internment camp, perhaps the smallest and shortest time for a diocese to exist. One of the internees, Bishop Constant Jurgens, the Bishop of Tuguegarao, was appointed as Bishop Prelate, while the sole diocesan priest in the camp, Monsignor Edward Casey, was appointed as Vicar General. This allowed the two to exercise faculties and powers under canon law to minister to the religious and lay internees in the camp as they see necessary. Now, a chapel was built in Los Baños, officially called the Cathedral of St. Joseph, formed by transforming one of the barracks in the Vatican City, with one half of the barracks housing the main chapel, and on the other half, 10 side altars to allow the simultaneous celebration of the Mass. Now, Monsignor Piani's pastoral care for the internees extended also to their corporal needs. Aware of the poor nutritional situation, Monsignor Piani enlisted the services of Lulu Reyes and the Chaplains Aid Association in the Catholic section of the Japanese Army to bring liturgical paraphernalia, hosts, and wine to Los Baños, and along with it, some food packages and toiletries hidden discreetly. Despite the poor nutritional situation in the camp, initially they were fed scrimp meals twice a day, which eventually graduated to lugaw, which had more water than rice. Most of the religious internees survived, except for two. One sister, Mother Glafier de la Redemption, a Franciscan missionary of Mary, and Father Joseph Mulry, who died in January 1945 due to malnutrition. The internees were liberated by American military and Filipino guerrilla forces in a daring raid on February 23, 1945. All of the internees were taken alive and were brought to Muntinlupa, where they recuperated until the rest of Manila was liberated. The group in UST were liberated starting February 3, 1945. However, one priest from the group, Father David Daly, SJ, died due to injuries from a shrapnel wound. Meanwhile, those who were left out of internment camps did not fare particularly well. For example, it is good to note the circumstances surrounding the death of Bishop William Finiman, the Prefect Apostolic of Calapan, Mindoro. Bishop Finiman was a German who eventually had himself naturalized as a Filipino. He was an outspoken man, which to some extent supposedly endeared him to his flock. However, this outspokenness combined with his stubbornness in not giving up church property for the use of the Japanese army did not endear him to the occupying forces. After some weeks of imprisonment, he was brought back to his residence on October 26, 1942 to get some clothes in preparation for a travel to Manila. He was brought to a boat the same day, and supposedly on the 28th, uh, one of the priests in Mindoro, Father Bernard Pues, was informed that Bishop Finiman committed suicide. They were saying that he jumped off the boat between Verde Island and Batangas. However, an eyewitness account from former seminarian Pedro Raagas, who was also in the same boat, said that a large rock was tied to the hands of Monsignor Finiman, and a large iron rod was affixed to his feet. After hearing some commands in Japanese, Pedro heard the clinking of the metal rod and the large rock by the ship's side. So it would appear that the bishop was thrown overboard and his body was never found. Monsignor Piani immediately wrote a letter to the apostolic delegate in Japan, Monsignor Marella, informing him of the death of Bishop Finiman and asking him that the Holy Father be informed of the same. It would appear that neither Monsignor Piani nor Monsignor Marella believed the Japanese version of the story, because in a letter from the Roman Curia to the superior of Monsignor Finiman in Rome, the Superior General of the Society of the Divine Word, it is said that they are not convinced of the Japanese version of the story. Bishop Finiman's death was neither the first nor the only circumstance of a clergy or religious suffering from Japanese cruelty. This was especially true during the last days of the Japanese occupation, which have been extremely brutal. A tally made after the war found out that there have been 264 clergy who were killed or died during the war, not including those who have died due to complications or illnesses brought about by imprisonment or internment. For example, in 1943, three Oblates of Mary Immaculate were killed in the Celebes Sea while they were attempting to escape to Australia. Around the same time, also three Canadian missionaries were killed. Well, one of them was assumed to have been killed because Father Desjardins was never found again. But Father Leo Poirier and Father Omer Leblanc were imprisoned and killed, and subsequently killed by the Japanese in Cotabato. In Panay, three Mill Hill priests, Father Van Amsel, Father Cooter, and Father Arts, were killed by the Japanese in a series of arrests and executions between July 1942 and February 1943. Unfortunately, around the same time, another three Mill Hill priests, Father Stoiber, Father Fink, and Father Kaufman, were accused by guerrilleros of sending information to foreigners in Manila, and they were subsequently captured and killed. Towards the end of the war, during the liberation in Singalong, three Capuchin fathers, Father Raimundo, Father Santiago, and Father Pacifico, were tortured and killed by Japanese soldiers. The same happened in Mandaluyong the same happened in Antipolo when two sisters were robbed of their only possession, their watches, and killed by Japanese soldiers. In Mandaluyong, the San Carlos Seminary was ransacked, and the four people who were living there, two priests of the Vincentian congregation, a brother, and one seminarian, were supposedly tied up and shot by Japanese soldiers. In the same day, a Holy Cross brother who was in the National Psychopathic Hospital, Brother Romain Laferriere, was also killed during the massacre in that hospital. In Paco, the more popular one of the more popular killings during the war was that of the group of Vincentian fathers and brothers in the Casa Central in San Marcelino. One, two, three, four, five, six Vincentian priests and four Vincentian brothers were killed. They were shot and bayoneted by the Japanese soldiers in the Estero de Balete, and their bodies were thrown in the Estero right afterwards. In Malate, six Colomban priests were actually five Colomban priests were killed. Father John Lalor was arrested and never seen again. And then the four were arrested together: Father Henagan, Father Kelly, Father Fallon, and Father Monaghan. were arrested and killed by Japanese soldiers in an apartment next door to the parish. Father Douglas here, I put Father Douglas with the group because he was also a Columban father, but he died in Pililla, Rizal, and he was arrested on accusations of espionage. He was arrested, tortured, and never seen again. In the same district in Malate, four Columban priests, in the same district in Malate, 2 days after, 16 German brothers of the Christian schools, including some lay people who sought refuge in the De La Salle College, were bayoneted to death by the Japanese. One brother, Brother Anthony, and the chaplain, Father Francis Cosgrave, were able to survive. In Intramuros, 14 Augustinians, 6 Recollects, 10 Franciscans, 6 Capuchins, one Vincentian, and 2 diocesan priests were rounded up together with the rest of the male population and herded to an underground bunker, after which hand grenades were thrown right at them. Those who survived were subsequently bayoneted to death, although one Augustinian and 2 Franciscans survived from the massacre. In Lipa, Monsignor Cirilo Castillo, 7 diocesan priests, 2 oblates of Saint Joseph, 2 Dominican priests, and 1 Jesuit scholastic were massacred by the Japanese uh, during when the Americans were already near Batangas. Meanwhile, in Baguio, 1 SBD priest, 1 CICM priest, 3 Daughters of Charity, 2 St. Paul the Shart Sister, 3 Assumption Sisters, 7 Pink Sisters, and 10 missionary canonesses were killed in the carpet bombing of Baguio on March 1945. Of course, the bombing came from the Americans. Other casualties of American air raids include the group of 1 St. Paul de Chart Sister, 1 Daughter of Charity, 1 Missionary of the Sacred Heart, and 10 Poor Clare nuns in Intramuros. The 15 Holy Ghost Sisters in Lipa, Batangas, 3 German Benedictine Sisters in Daraga, Albay, 4 SBD priests and 1 Holy Ghost Sister in Bangued, Abra, and 4 Franciscans of the Immaculate Conception in Nueva Vizcaya. Now, as the Americans drew closer to Manila, the apostolic delegate, Monsignor Piani, realized that his house, the apostolic delegation in Malate, was not particularly safe, and he asked the Jesuits in La Ignaciana, the Jesuit retreat house where the Jesuit Bishop Hayes of Cagayan de Oro and the Filipino Jesuit seminarians were staying. He transferred there right before liberation together with Bishop James McCloskey, an American bishop, and the Bishop of Haro, who, like Bishop Hayes, were among the handful of clergymen on house arrest because of their illness and through the intervention of Monsignor Piani. And so there, on February 10, American troops from the 1st Cavalry Division crossed the Pasig River into Santa Ana. And 4 days later, the Jesuit superior, Father Hurley, arrived from San Tomas internment camp, and on the same night was invited by the apostolic delegate to lead the relief efforts of the Catholic Church in the Philippines. Now, on the last part on towards liberation, so on that night, the Catholic Welfare Organization was born. The CWO was instituted by virtue of the faculties granted to Monsignor Piani by the Holy See in 1943, owing to the difficulties of communicating with the Vatican during wartime. It was envisioned to serve as the official relief organization of the Catholic hierarchy in the Philippines, and in this regard, Monsignor Piani designated himself as President General and appointed the Superior of the Jesuits, Father Hurley, as Secretary General and Chief Executive Officers. In the next days, Monsignor Piani issued 3 letters as president of this organization. First, a letter dated February 15, addressed to all administrators of ecclesiastical properties in the Philippines, informing them of the establishment of the CWO and the appointment of Father Hurley, and asking them to refer all matters related to use of ecclesiastical properties for civil, military, or relief purposes to the Secretary General. A second letter was issued, a supplementary letter, in fact, dated February 16, clarifying that the intention of Monsignor Piani was for the organization to be a committee sole, not a committee of members, and that he does not think that bishops would think that this work, this organization, would be an interference or an overstepping into the episcopal jurisdiction of the local bishops. And finally, a third letter addressed General Douglas MacArthur, offering the fullest cooperation of the Roman Catholic Church in whatever way it may be possible. While the third letter is a stark opposite of how Monsignor Piani collaborated with the Japanese, we will see that the second letter betrayed the strained relationship or armed neutrality, as Father Hurley would describe years later, between Monsignor Piani and Archbishop O'Doherty, owing to an intervention that Monsignor Piani had to make in 1935 when the Holy See put the Archdiocese of Manila under financial guardianship. The CWO had its office in Santa Ana in Lagna, later transferring to Sampaloc in Nazareth School, and then in the Holy Ghost College, and then in La Consolacion College in Mendiola. With Father Hurley at the helm, the CWO was able to distribute 906,000 worth of goods in merely 5 months. By 1948, 3 years after it was established, the CWO was able to reach more than 1.8 million people, handling an average of 1,000 pounds of goods a day. Now, as time went by and as communications became stabilized in Manila, Monsignor Piani attempted as soon as possible to send a message to the Holy See. And through the auspices of the American Consul General, he reported the details of Japanese atrocities in the country. To his amazement, Monsignor Piani would later receive a reply from the Secretariat of State saying that Japanese officials publicly denied the atrocities of the report, denied the truth of the report of the atrocities. In reply, Monsignor Piani sent this telegraph to the Vatican enumerating what happened in Manila during the liberation. So he said here, 14 Agustinians, 6 Recollects, 10 Franciscans, 6 Capuchins killed with hand grenades in Intramuros, 3 more Capuchins bayoneted and shot in Singalong, 10 Vincentians machine gunned in San Marcelino, one more Vincentian shot in Ermita, 16 Christian brothers bayoneted in La Salle College, 4 Columbans taken by the Japanese military police and never heard from again, 2 secular priests killed in Batangas, 2 secular priests killed in Tayabas, Jesuit scholastic and seminarian killed in Batangas, 2 seminarians killed in Laguna, total killed verified to date 85. In addition, about 30 killed by Japanese snipers or died in fires started by Japanese soldiers. Apostolic Delegation, Archbishop's Palace, 10 churches, 9 monasteries and convents, 12 seminaries and schools, 2 hospitals, 1 orphanage totally destroyed. Letter with names of dead, further details follows. Now we move to the last part, which is on the new peacetime. The Archbishop became sickly after the liberation. In fact, he wrote to a confrere in the Salesian order that he had been confined in a clinic for 3 months where he had 2 major operations after the liberation of Manila. Since the delegation house in MH del Pilar in Malate was burned by the Japanese, he accepted the offer of the Benedictine monks to stay with them in the Abbey of Our Lady of Montserrat, which served as the official seat of his delegation. There he would have the joint celebration of his golden presbyteral and episcopal anniversaries, after which he would move to Mexico, where he served 26 years prior after being appointed as apostolic visitor by Pope Pius XII. He would live out the rest of his life there, dying on September 27, 1956. To say that Monsignor Piani was well loved in the Philippines would be an understatement. In the delegation house, it was said, everyone, from the bishops to the priests and religious, or to the street children he personally prepared for their first communion, everyone will find advice, comfort, recommendations, guidance, spiritual direction, and material help. Thus, when he left in 1948, an Italian publication summarized his achievements by saying that it can be said that in conclusion that in the Philippines, as in every other place in the world, the church is out of the ordeal of war, with her churches destroyed, but strengthened in vitality. We see that true in the continuing legacies of Monsignor Piani that we still know until today. For example, the Catholic welfare uh, organization, the corporate structure of the CWO that Piani established was eventually amended to become a committee of members from a corporation soul. This committee eventually became the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines. Together with the anniversary of World War II then, the end of the World War II then, the CBCP also celebrated its 75th foundation anniversary. Another living legacy of Monsignor Piani is the establishment of diplomatic relations between the Philippines and the Holy See. On November 17, 1947, President Manuel Rojas expressed to Monsignor Piani his intent to establish diplomatic relations with the Holy See. While neither of them was able to see this work through, diplomatic relations was formally established on April 8, 1951, with the signing of the treaty formally establishing the ties between the Philippines and the Holy See. Our first ambassador to the Holy See, Ambassador Manuel Moran, former Chief Justice, presented his credentials to Pope Pius XII on June 4, 1951, while the first Apostolic Nuncio to the Philippines, Monsignor Egidio Vaniozzi, presented his credentials to President Elpidio Quirino on February 20, 1951. So that concludes my presentation, but maybe to just to encapsulate everything that I've presented in 2 or 3 sentences. Uh, the war interrupted the natural development of the Catholic Church in the Philippines, uh, especially after the Spanish left. It was the time that American missionaries were already coming in, other foreign missionaries were coming in, trying to stabilize the church, which for so long had to depend on the Patronato Real. But what the church did actually, what the war did to the church actually was to hasten the Filipinization movement, which allowed more Filipino priests, especially those from the religious orders, to take responsibility for the growth of the church. And all of that, of course, comes under the aegis of various interventions. But as the quote said, the war may have left the church in the Philippines with her physical churches destroyed, but definitely renewed with vitality. So with that, again, thank you for listening, and I hope you found the presentation worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Aaron. Grabe, sobrang dami kong natutunan ngayong gabi. It's a very comprehensive talk, no? Despite the need to make it short. But thank you so much. Very interesting. So many people have commented that this is a unique topic. Sabi pa nung isang historian natin, this is a unique topic. Kasi nga, always when we talk about World War II, it's usually the focus is on the military aspect, no? Or say the atrocities committed. But this is a different take. Kaya when we were talking dati, Aaron, I really wanted to include this in the webinar series kasi nga it's seldom explored, no? So thank you so much for bringing this to us. And I really enjoyed the talk. I enjoyed the slides. I'm sure most of them did, no? Kasi ang laking tulong talaga yung mga slides and the visuals and everything. And then some of the names that, that you just read or read about or heard about. Yan, may faces na sila ngayon. Like the Japanese seminarians in UST, di ba? Were they soldiers and then in the seminary? Ganun ba yon, Brother Aaron? Di ba there were two?
Technically, they were not soldiers, no?
Ah,
They were asked to volunteer. They volunteered technically to be part of the Catholic unit.
I
In
see.
1942, they were recruited by Bishop Taguchi. But the problem, however, was that when the Americans were starting to gain ground in 1944, they were drafted back into the military. So,
Mm.
of the 3 seminarians whose photos you saw there, one was ordained a priest, Father Ikeda, and Dr. Victorres would know him better, no? Kasi siya sa kanya ko actually nakuha yung picture. Pahiram po, Dr. Torres. And Yung isa, si Nishimura, actually died. Died in San Juan de Dios. There are two conflicting statements about how he died, no? Kasi he died in the cusp of the bombing of the Americans in Manila. One statement said he died of tuberculosis. Yung isang sabi na tamaan ng shrapnel. But in either case, he died in San Juan de Dios during the bombing of Intramuros.
And San Juan de Dios was actually razed to the ground by the Japanese even before February 23rd eh. So ang daming ang namatay dyan na civilians, especially those who are no bedridden and all. Walang pake, sinunog talaga ng mga Hapon. No? Very sad kasi parang very sad lang talaga. War is really, really sad. So, ang daming questions. Ako mag-overtime tayo nito, Brother Adam. Pasensya na ha. So, siguro kailangan... Wait, one question. When you say apostolic delegate, what is the difference between the apostolic nuncio now and the then apostolic delegate? Or is it the same?
The only difference is that an apostolic delegate does not have a diplomatic character. Meaning, hindi ka formally accredited as an ambassador. Yun lang yung difference. Kasi for example now, our apostolic nuncio is an ambassador because there's diplomatic relations between the Philippines and the Vatican. Pero pag apostolic delegate, wala kang diplomatic.
Wala pa. Because at that time, wala pang relations, no?
Yeah, because at that time, we were not yet a free country. We were still under the Americans, so we're not yet able to establish our own diplomatic relations.
I see. So why did it come so late? Why 1951? Why not 1946 or 47? Medyo parang ang tagal.
Rojas started in 47, but because of a strong anti-Catholic, I don't want to say pro-Mason, no? But anti-Catholic elements in the Philippine Senate, it took long for them to actually fund. As early as 1949, inapprove na sa cabinet ni Quirino. Pero no funding was given. In fact, at a certain point, it was already in the proposed budget, but the Senate deleted the item for the Embassy of the Holy See and replaced it with funding for a delegation in Egypt. So, meron kasing ganun pa ring dynamic eh. So,
may politics pa rin palang involved, ano? It's not as easy as, sige, friends na tayo. Hindi ganun kadali. No?
I guess,
wow, daming questions, Aaron.
Spanish era.
Oh, yeah. Wait, simulan na natin ha, dahil marami pang pumapasok, oh. Okay, from Victores. Hi, Vic. How did Piani deal with the situation with Guerrero and the other church officials who collaborated with the Japanese? Magandang tanong yan. Yan din yung tanong ko kanina eh. Ano ba yung, how did Piani view them? How did he deal with them? Yung mga may pro-Japanese leanings.
We will, hindi ko masasabi for certain, no? Because most of Piani's correspondences just opened up this year in the Vatican archives. They finally declassified, they finally opened to researchers the documents from the time of Pope Pius XII. So there's a lot to explore there. But what I can say for sure was that when there are instances that Piani needed help in negotiating with the government, his first man to call was Guerrero. In fact, Guerrero and Piani were very good friends.
Oh, they were? Okay. That's my follow-up question.
Friends.
Oh, so they were
very good friends.
I see. So no animosity between them.
At least at the personal level, but I don't know about their politics, so that is yet to be seen in the Vatican archives, in the reports that Monsignor Piani wrote. But they were good friends.
I see. Okay. So, yeah. To my next question. From Rino Francisco. Hi, Rino. Was the deferment by the Holy See of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the puppet republic, puppet nung ano pa to, kay Laurel, and the Vatican influenced by the war situation becoming more favorable to the Allies? Meaning kasi we were a puppet government, parang medyo leaning axis, parang ganon.
Well, to be fair, there were pressures both from the Allies and the Axis, no? Even yung pag-open ng diplomatic relations ng Vatican with Japan in 1942 was heavily questioned by the Allies, as I mentioned, no? Kasi parang they felt that the Vatican was making legitimate Japan's conquest of areas in Asia. But for the Vatican, that was a policy that was developed in World War One, that they will not recognize any state formed during the war until a final peace treaty is enacted. So,
Okay,
alam
so
mo naman yung
natuloy ba
nagkaroon
yun?
ng, sorry,
Natuloy nung 1942?
hindi tinanggap ng Holy See.
Hindi, I
Kasi
see.
yun yung
Okay.
official reason nila na since wala pang, dahil nasa gera pa tayo, we will defer any recognition of a new government until a final peace treaty is signed.
Very safe, no? Magandang ano yun, magandang move
although,
nila yun.
although to be fair to the Holy See, that was their policy during World War One. So
I
hindi siya
see.
dahil lang they are being pressured by the Allied forces. Although of course the Allied ambassadors, when they found out about it, they already objected. Object sila ng object.
Mm,
Pero again, that was a Vatican policy from World War
I
One.
see. Medyo ang hirap rin nung talagang the Catholic Church was at the crossroads because parang hirap nung situation nila, no? Parang damned if you do, damned if you don't, ganyan. And eto, maging macro muna tayo, Brother Aaron. Of course, after the war, there were several allegations against the church or several haka-haka ng mga tao saying that the church didn't do enough and, to stop Hitler or stop the fascism. But you mentioned to me when we were talking earlier about the Vatican releasing something or publishing something. Can you expound on that?
Yeah. I think in the 1980s or 1990s, I'm not sure exactly when, but the Holy See published 11 volumes of documents. It's the title is in French, but if it's translated into English, it's Acts and Documents of the Holy See during the Second World War. So it was a compilation of communications coming in and out of the Vatican Secretariat of State, which is something like their Ministry of Foreign Affairs, no? So all communications coming in from different governments, the notes of the Secretary of State and the Monsignori working there, and all the instructions of Pius XII. So actually, some of the documents I cited came from that publication, and you have to also understand that Pius XII was at least I'm trying to respond to allegations that he was pro-Nazi. I don't think he was pro-Nazi. In fact, he was against Hitler when he was ambassador, the papal nuncio to Germany. But he was a seasoned diplomat. He was a career Vatican diplomat. All his life, he was in the diplomatic service of the Holy See. And he knew that certain things are not to be written. He knew that the possibility of Hitler capturing the Vatican was not impossible. After all, Vatican is such a small state with no armed forces of its own. It's landlocked by Italy, which is an Axis country. So it was very easy for Hitler to. It would have been easy for Hitler to capture the Vatican if he wanted to, but so he knew that some of his statements might provoke Hitler and might be damning if and when the time came that he would be held prisoner by German forces. So I think he knew that because he was a seasoned diplomat and he knew how German politics work. No?
I see. Ayun, sabi ni Rino, thank you for the enlightening answer, sabi niya. And then may comment siya, in October 1943 also, the Germans still occupied Rome. Oo nga, no? So, napaka-dangerous pala din ng kalagayan ng Vatican, no? And yun nga, parang nakakaawa din yung church kasi damned if you do talaga and damned if you don't. If they don't say anything, people will get mad thinking na may pagka-collaborator sila. If they say something naman, people will say they're meddling, ano? Medyo mahirap nga talaga yung kalagayan. Ito, may
Actually,
interesting question. Yes.
Siguro, just to add lang, no, actually for me, no, writing on the church during the war, one of the most difficult things is to understand that the church is not a monolithic structure because of the personalities involved. No, you have
Yes.
people, for example, just in the Archdiocese of Manila, you have O'Doherty and Guerrero going to diametrically opposed directions. So
Mhm.
It's so what do you say now is the official church position. So you don't get to say something na may official. It's not monolithic. So you get to explore now how they maneuvered through things and what was their intention behind their positions.
Right, right, right. I like that term. It's not a monolithic ano. Magagamit ko 'yan. Borrow, borrow.
Sure.
Ito, may magandang question because our viewer Dan, si Dan Antonio. Hi Dan. Descendant siya ng isang Japanese soldier dito, no? So ito yung question niya. Did the Japanese government encourage their servicemen to be baptized in the Catholic faith? This happened to my Japanese grandfather who was an officer in the Imperial Japanese Army and was born a Buddhist. So he was baptized to be Catholic in San Miguel Church near Malacanang and married our grandmother in the same church. Miss Des, this is not the first time. There are also similar situations. Were they encouraged or na-in love lang talaga sila at kailangan nilang maging Katoliko bago ikasal sa Katolika?
I haven't read anything that said it was an official policy. Although I think if you look at some of the names being sent here, many of them or a number of them I think were students or married to alumna of Catholic schools in Japan, no? For example, si Colonel Narusawa, while he was not Catholic, was married to someone who studied in the Sacred Heart School in Japan. I don't think I'm not sure if it was an official policy, but maybe they were looking at ways to find connection with the Catholics in the Philippines.
I see. O kasi predominantly Catholic no?
Mm.
Okay, may
So
pang
they
question.
needed
But
someone to
before,
speak English also.
right, right, right. And before we proceed, I'd like to say hi muna to some of our viewers. Si Christian, hi Christian Alacar is watching. Bong Mamuad of Mount Samat Historical Shrine, no? Bong is watching. Barely is watching. Glenn Delgo, historian. He's from UST but now teaching at Chiang Kai-shek, I think. Yes, hi Glenn. Ricardo Caluen is watching. Ate Rose Mendoza, hi Ate Rose for watching. Yan, so tuloy na tayo ulit. Question din ni Vic kanina, what is Blanche Jurica, the mother-in-law of Chick Parsons? Yes, she is the grandma of Peter Parsons, my good friend. And ang kwento sa akin ni Peter, Brother Aaron, is that yung grandma niya is actually not part of, people always think that she's part of parang a network of resistance fighters, no? Because when she was executed, she was with this Protestant group, yung mga Cosmopolitan Church, Mary Boyd Stagg, and yung mga sila Darby ng what was that hospital? Kasi it's Protestant group. But Peter clarified that to me, saying that she was acting on her own. She was typing her own propaganda papers
Material.
and oo, matigas daw talaga yung ulo. And she's actually hindi siya American but she's Czech, but she has been here since the early 1900s. So ayun, so she's the mother-in-law of Peter. I hope Peter is watching or he'll watch. He's in Spain now kaya baka yung time difference. But when I posted about this episode, nag-react kaagad siya. Sabi niya, gusto niya mapanood. And I'll send him the recording if it's not. I hope you're tuning in, senyor, but I know the time difference. And hi pa tayo ulit to AE. Hi, AE is watching. Albert Labrador, good friend. Therese Francisco. Therese is a Philwar
Hi,
volunteer.
Therese.
Danon Dizon. Therese, Therese, no? Brother Aaron. Yan. So marami pang questions. Teka ha, ito. Ayun pala. How was the relationship between Guerrero and Piani? So we answered that earlier. How is the relationship between Guerrero, Piani, and O'Doherty?
Sige, medyo maganda time for Marites. You know what people forget was that Guerrero was actually the private secretary of O'Doherty. They used to be very close. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, it was O'Doherty who nominated Guerrero to become a bishop.
Okay.
But eventually they drifted apart because when Guerrero was already a bishop, he was the vicar general of the archdiocese. This all happened in the 1930s. The Archdiocese of Manila back then owned several banks. The BPI, because namana from the Spanish, then there was this Philippine Trust Bank. and then Monte
Mm.
de Piedad.
Mhm.
Now, because of some American financial advisors of O'Doherty who maybe have the gift of tongues, na magaling magbenta, they made O'Doherty invest so much money in the Mindoro Sugar Estate, which
Okay.
turned out to be a very bad investment kasi nalugi, which forced O'Doherty now to pledge as protection for the loans all the properties of the archdiocese, including the churches, including the Buena Vista Estate, including the hospitals.
Oh my. Okay.
Ge- Guerrero was not informed of the decision. So that's why he opposed that measure na you cannot do that. You should have consulted me because I'm Vicar General. But
Mhm.
O'Doherty felt that Guerrero, his former protege, was trying to replace him as Archbishop
Mhm.
of Manila. Now, he felt that Guerrero and Piani were conspiring because he knows that Guerrero and Piani are good friends. So, Piani reported the matter to the Vatican because that's what we usually do. When there's a problem with the diocese under your watch, you report it to the Vatican. And the Vatican decided that Piani will be the financial administrator temporarily of the archdiocese in order to correct all of those mistakes made by O'Doherty. So starting then, the relationship between O'Doherty and Guerrero and O'Doherty and Piani were strained. In fact, when the CWO was established, uh, Piani asked Father Hurley, the Jesuit superior, to cross the Pasig to go to UST to talk to Archbishop O'Doherty because O'Doherty was living with the Dominican fathers in UST. So he
Living
brought
with, not intern.
no living with them in the community because he was
In
Irish. He was not intern.
he was Irish. Okay,
He was
okay, got it.
Irish. So he brought a letter from Piani stating that I formed ganyan ganyan, and apparently O'Doherty was furious na parang, I am the Bishop of Manila. He's only the delegate. He has no jurisdiction, etc., etc. And then Hurley said something that I'm just bringing the letter. I don't want to be caught between two miters, which apparently made O'Doherty even angrier. So armed neutrality is how Father Hurley described it. No, in public they have to be casual, but O'Doherty, especially when he got older, he was a very dynamic bishop when he was young. No? He established so many things. But as he grew older, he became more imperious and more jealous of his authority and power. And I think that eventually became his downfall. So
I
when
see.
he died, no, he had very few friends. Even the Jesuits and the Marinols whom he asked to come to the Philippines, the American Jesuits and the American Marinol Fathers, eventually became alienated sa kanya, and he had to look for his secretary from elsewhere until of course he got Father Rufino Santos, who became his most loyal lieutenant.
Well, si Father Ricardo Santos ngayon ko lang rin nalaman that, he did some heroic things din pala, no? Alam ko lang yung sa kanya pinangalan yung hospital sa San Juan, eh.
He,
But, very interesting. Tonight's topic is very, very interesting. Yun, teka, marami pang questions, dami pumapasok.
can I
Okay,
ask
ito.
just something? Can I just a
Yes,
little
sure.
tidbit about Rufino Santos? Apparently, the Japanese were about to arrest O'Doherty.
Okay.
Siya talaga yung accused ng funding the American prisoners of war. Pero
Alright.
sabi ni Santos, ako yung treasurer, ako yung nagdesisyon. So that's
Oh
why it
my.
was Santos who was imprisoned. And I think kaya yun yung mark ng loyalty ni Cardinal Santos kay Archbishop O'Doherty.
Right, oo, no? He took the bullet,
He
parang
took the
gano'n, ano?
bullet for his
Pero
bishop.
sinerte dahil the day that he was supposed to be executed, believe it was liberated.
Liberated, yeah.
Oo, may ano talaga, nabantayan ng ano, ng kanyang guardian angel. Anyway, what happened to Archbishop Guerrero? You said kanina about yung he was part of the war crimes trial, being accused of a collaborator. Eh kasi naman yung mga sinasabi niya nakakakilabot din eh. Yung kanina when you showed that slide, yung he said parang,
Mm.
let us pray to the Nipponese saints, mga ganun-ganun. Eh talaga namang ma-implicate ka nun, di ba? So what happened to, this is a question from Dr. Blas Bermudez, what happened to Archbishop Guerrero, and was he incarcerated as a collaborator? Was he jailed?
I think he was acquitted, if I'm not mistaken. I have to double check. Either he was acquitted or he was convicted and then he was pardoned. Either
I
of
see.
the two. I just have to double check. But
Wait, teka
he
ha.
was not imprisoned.
Oo. Teka, kanina
What?
nabasa ko may isang sumagot. I think it's Sito Maramba. Ano
He was not
yun?
imprisoned, but he had to
Oo, he
resign
wasn't.
from his post.
Right, he wasn't. No? So, na-save din siya. But was his Philippinization, what do you call this? Yung kanyang move to Philippinize the church, did it did it take effect or nagkabunga pa yon during the Japanese occupation or was it just propaganda by the Japanese?
Well, not during the Japanese occupation, but ang nangyari kasi parang nasilaban noong panahon ng Japanese occupation. But after the war, people picked it up. Siguro dahil meron ng awareness. So for example, in less than 10 years time from liberation, you would hear of Filipino priests from the religious orders already openly complaining bakit hindi pa, for example, Filipino ang presidente ng Ateneo o bakit hindi pa Filipino ang presidente ang rector ng UST. So you already have that awareness, no? And I think to a large extent that came from that consciousness brought about by Guerrero during the war. And you see in that picture I used earlier, no, kung paano nila ginamit as propaganda material yung Gombursa.
Yun nga, I was gonna comment, no? From Gombursa to, ang tagal nun, ano? Ang tagal bago na nagkaroon ng bunga, right? So, the Philippine church has been, fighting for that for so long na rin pala talaga, no? Yun. Ito, another question from Don Fernandez. Hi, Don. What sanctions did the pro-Japanese clergy get after the war, given that they turned a blind eye to Japanese atrocities? Were there a lot of pro-Japanese clergy?
Actually, wala ako ibang makitang openly except kay Guerrero.
Oh, I see.
A lot of them actually mistrust the Japanese. I think number one because, ito ano ko lang to ha, parang observation, hindi ito hunch ko lang to na meron kasing parang superiority complex ang mga Pilipino against the Japanese dahil hindi sila Christian. At least during that time, that was the mindset. So I think they tended to look down on the Japanese, that they'd rather be under the Americans who were Christians rather than the Japanese who weren't. And many, especially in the provinces, were not really complied begrudgingly, I suppose, no? And when you see all the atrocities happening, when you see friends being picked up, even foreigner friends, I don't think that really inspires a lot of confidence. But I've not heard of others. But in the circular written by O'Doherty in 1944, he said a number of priests approached the government, approached Laurel. So O'Doherty might have some companions. That's why I'm really excited to go back to the Vatican archives and see the newly opened files from the time of Pius XII, because we will see definitely what Piani reported discreetly other than what is already published.
And Piani did really report the atrocities during the Battle of Manila, no? Oh, but the Japanese were denying it, no? Kanina in your talk. Ito, may isa pang question from Glenn Dalego. Were there accounts of church during the war sheltering some victims and casualties of war? Did the church also address the issues of torture and killings and even the comfort women by the Japanese? Yung siguro yung sheltering the victims, like 'di ba the Columban priests, they were sheltering people, and kaya nga 'di ba kaya Remedios, tama ba
Remedios
ako?
Hospital.
Yes, 'di ba? Oo. But
Definitely, I think ang hirap lang nun kasi, for example, in Assumption Convent, other than the sisters living there, especially as the Americans started to gain ground, they accepted so many families from Ermita Malate area to stay with them. The same with
right.
St. Teresa's and other institutions. But ang hirap kasi palagi para rin silang para din silang nomads, palipat-lipat sila. They are often evicted by the Japanese from their institutions. But in places, for example, in Tondo, the church was the like the evacuation center of
Mhm,
the people until it was deliberately set on fire by Japanese soldiers in 1945. Now,
mhm.
in terms of torture and killings and even the comfort women, there are several priests, in fact, who were killed because they attempted to stop Japanese soldiers from molesting a woman. There is a Vincentian priest who was killed in St. Paul's College because he stopped a Japanese soldier from trying to touch one of the internas in St. Paul. Uh, One of the priests in Mindoro, the second martyr after Bishop Finiman, was also killed because he tried to protect some of the schoolgirls of the Holy Ghost sisters in Mindoro. So definitely meron, and that's the challenge, no? Ang dami nating documentation, for example, on our heroes from the military side, no? Ako, yung gusto
Mhm.
ko sana from the church side, we that we be able to document also the heroic actions of the various clergy, sisters, priests, nuns during that time.
Right, right, right. I was really surprised when you said 264 were killed, no? Wala pa dun yung mga namatay due to the hardships of war. It was more of,
Wala pa.
yeah, right, right, right.
The
And
264 is either
nakakagulat. Mm-mm.
mhm. 264 is either killed by the Japanese or killed by the bombings.
Mhm, mhm. Right. And 'di ba si Finn naman, was he a monsignor, bishop?
He
What
was a
was he?
bishop.
A bishop. And then 'di ba he tried to stop also yung Japanese from entering the convent to molest the nuns, was it?
No, he was trying to stop the Japanese from taking the convent of the sisters.
I see.
The
Eh,
the
baka may
priest
masama
na
din
na-mention
kasing
ko, yun yung
oh,
nag-stop nung imomolest
yung
yung mga
isa pang
estudyante
Vincentian. I see. Alright.
from
Grabe,
Mindoro
'no?
also.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Ayun, Sito Maramba, ito nakita ko na yung comment ni Sito. Hi Sito, Sito is from England pa ito, sa Plymouth, Dr. Maramba. He said the case against Bishop Guerrero was dismissed in 1946, and in 1949 he was appointed Bishop of San Fernando, Pampanga. That's where they say he was well loved daw by the people. I see. Ronnie De La Cruz is watching from Bamban. Hi Ronnie! Mga good friends natin yan ng World War II history, advocacy. Ito, there's a comment from our viewer, Mr. Ricardo Caluen. Hi, sir. He says, Father Agustin Consunhi, SJ, parish
Mhm.
priest of Iligan, during the first year of occupation was arrested in Lanao, interned initially in Davao, and brought to Manila. Believed to have been brought to First Santiago where he was last seen. Marami sila, no, na transport Santiago. And kanina you mentioned si
Mhm.
Sister Trinita of the Merenol
Mhm.
Sisters. Cellmate yan ni Jose Falianes Escoda. And it was
Yes.
through her, her accounts after the war that, we found out how Josefa was during her last days, ganyan. And they were always talking eh.
Mm.
Siguro that's the only thing you can do to keep your sanity, di ba? Pag nakakulong kayo at torture kayo. So, parang nakakatawa kasi through her accounts, nalaman natin yun nga, yung mga iniisip ni Josefa in her last, she always her children, her women's group na hope she could have, saved more people, mga ganyan, no? So,
A-
nakakatuwa.
Actually, yung kay Sister Trinita, sa lahat ng mga narrations tungkol sa Fort Santiago, sa kanya ako pinaka naiyak. Kasi
Oh,
not only was she stripped of her habit, but she was waterboarded.
oh my.
So, I think siya lang yung madring narinig kong na waterboard nung Japanese occupation. So, when I was reading her reminiscences, I was crying. Sabi ko, siguro it must have been also very difficult for her to try to go back to the experience and write it down, no? Pero
Right, oo. And ano to? Is this a book that she published?
No, it was a document in the Meridional Archives in New York.
Oh, wow, very nice, no? Oo, magandang sana maano 'yan, maano mo din 'yan, ma-research mo din 'yan, Brother Aaron, kasama mo. Very interesting. And I'm sure ang daming interesadong, people, no, which books to read. So, si Hurley, he wrote a book, right? After the war, did he?
Yes.
Si
Yung
Hurley.
wartime superior, yung parang diary niya nung kung ano yung
Right,
nangyari nung
right.
war.
Who's the other priest who wrote a memoir? Was it De La Costa? Who was the other one?
De La
Uh,
Costa wrote something, but
Labrador.
that's just a short. Father Labrador, yes, wrote his
Labrador, yeah.
diary. It was published.
Right. And of course, Guerrilla Padre, Father
Father
Haggerty,
Haggerty.
no? He also has a book, Guerrilla Padre. I have that 1946 book. Yeah. Isa sa mga, ano ko yan, prized. Hindi naman ako magaling mag-collect ng mga luma, pero isa yan sa mga prized, ano ko yan, possessions. It's a 1946 published book. Lumang-luma na nga. Anyway, so yung kanina rin yung when you were talking about the Columban priests, for those interested, the Malate Church, meron silang parang parish center, no? And in the top floor, they dedicated that to the, well, it's a museum, and like 60 or 70% of the exhibit is about the 5 or 6 Columban priests who were martyred, who were killed by the Japanese, no, for helping the people of Malate at the time. So sila Father Kelly, Father Layler, Father Moynihan, yung mga yan. And it's a very good exhibit. So, libre naman siya. So, those of you who are interested, you can just go there or maybe message first, no? Siyempre, baka sinasara din nila from time to time. But it's nice. I went there pre-pandemic and you get to learn a lot of things. May mga diorama pa about the Battle of Manila and how the Columban order was helping the people then. Yun ko nga nalaman na yung Remedios Hospital pala kasi nga. Kaya Remedios
Remedios.
ang name. Yeah. So wait, to, ang dami pang comments. Dr. Jose said, Father Reuter was one of those incarcerated in Los Baños. Right.
Yes.
Father James Reuter.
Actually, kaya yun ngayon nung when I became interested about the priests in Los Baños, yun yung initial interest ko. I was in college then. And Father Reuter was still alive. So parang ang hinayang ko nun, there are still people from that period who are still alive and who could be interviewed. Sayang, sana na record sila or their reminiscences could have been taped for historians in the future to write about it.
Baka si Dr. Jose, marami siyang mga na-interview nun and he is able to digitize this. Sana nga, ano, no? Very interesting kasi Father Reuter is one of the parang resource din siya talaga nung during the time of the war. Eh. And I think he has given talks then at the time. I wasn't that active pa at the time. Malilit pa yung mga anak ko. But I've always heard na, ayun, kinukuha siya laging resource speaker. Ito, may interesting comment si Vic. The death of Piniman was said to be the reason why Taguchi went back to Japan. Yun pala. Bakit masyado siyang nasaktan? Ganun ba? Or nabuisit na siya? Ano?
Hindi ko alam. Wala po akong pang nabasa. Maybe, because chikay ko mamaya si Sir.
Oo nga, ako din. Message! Ewan ko si Vic, Marites, maraming alam. And you know what? When I went to DLSU dati, inikot ako ni Vic. Remember that, Vic? We went to that parang garden where they have like a parang mini memorare, Manila, ganun yung parang for the Battle of Manila. And nandun parang I remember Father Cosgrave ata yung parang there's a memorial to Father Cosgrave. He was one of those killed in LaSalle, no, together with the LaSalle brothers. But Father Cosgrave was Redemptorist yata.
Yes.
Parang tumakbo lang siya doon or something like that.
Hindi.
And,
kasi Baclaran was near the airfield, di ba?
Okay,
so they were sent out of Baclaran. So they looked for a place to stay. They asked the brothers, doon sila. So parang ang role na rin nila ay chaplain.
And the worst part is, during the latter part of the war, especially during the liberation of Manila, wala nang pakialam yung Hapon, non-enemy nationals like Spanish, Germans, no? Ay, nako, the LaSalle brothers were all Germans, right? And in fact, is that true? Parang may nabasa ko na, at the start of the war, yung LaSalle, parang naging strategic na Germans ang ipadala dito. Tama?
Nag-exchange gift na. So
Ah,
they sent some of the American brothers to India, and then the German brothers in India were sent to the Philippines kasi nga
I
na-foresee na nila na magkakaroon ng invasion ng Pilipinas ng mga Hapon.
right.
Pero meron pa rin naiwang eight brothers, American brothers who were interned in Los Baños. So para tuloy, you were better off in internment kahit maghirap ka ng 7 months.
Mm,
Pero afterwards, buhay pa rin sila unlike
oo
the
nga.
16
True.
German brothers.
Oo. Isa sa mga worst massacre sites yan during the Battle of
Mm.
Manila. And kanina yung na-mention mo na si Apostolic Delegate Piani lumipat sa Santa Ana. Oh
Mm.
my, another ano yan, talagang binantayan na ni Lord kasi Santa Ana was kind of a bit spared no, compared to the
Yeah.
other parts of Manila. So may hand talaga yung paglipat niya doon. Okay, ang dami pang questions. Okay. Wagering, ito kay Don din galing. Wagering that Bishop Guerrero approved of the executions of the clergy by the Japanese. Hindi naman siguro approved,
Hindi
no?
naman siguro. Hindi, I don't think so.
Walang magawa.
Kasi generally, si Guerrero was, sabi nga nung kanina well-loved siya. Anywhere he goes, he's well-loved.
Really.
He has a very simple character. In fact, when he refused to be a bishop twice, he lived in poverty, and may occasion pa na napagkamalan siyang houseboy dun sa suot niya, dun sa kanyang residence, and not the bishop. So I don't think it was that he supported, but that he felt that the only way for the church to survive was for the church to cooperate. So parang
Mm-hmm.
I guess he felt that he was being pushed to a wall, and that the only way that he could help others was
Mm-hmm.
that if he would cooperate himself.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it's easy for us now to judge or say things in
Mm.
retrospect, but at the time you just really needed to survive. Siyempre,
Mm.
parang kumbaga yun yung new normal nun, di ba? Yung new
Correct.
normal nun, nandyan na yung Japanese and they're here to stay. Parang ganyan.
Mm.
So, it's really hard to... In fact, yung mga tao nun, parang pagsasabi na collaborator yan, me, I dissect eh. Kasi, it's hard, but that was the new normal then. Unless na lang may pinatay or
Yeah,
may
exactly.
pinahamak, yun talaga, di ba?
Mm.
Pero yung things like, they just needed to survive, we can probably sometimes, really dissect first what happened. Oo. Pero yun nga,
Actually,
kasi siguro yung maybe the damning thing about it is when he said yun nga, yung kanyang
we
Nipponese
pray.
welcome. Oh, we pray to the Nipponese saints. Marami bang Nipponese saints?
Marami yung mga martyrs din ng Japan.
Oo, no, oo.
Sila
Grabe din
Lorenzo
yung
Ruiz and
purge
ano.
nila noon. So, it's really a wonder that they have a Catholic community in Japan, no? Ay, Gary Mendoza Alba is watching. Hi, Gary. Gary is a writer for us. No, he wrote our third book. It's about his dad being a pensionado in wartime
Mm.
Japan. And syempre, as Filipinos there, they were very close to to the religious there. And most of yung close nila doon were French. Which kanina
Mm.
meron siyang sinulat dito that the French were also parang removed from Japan after the war. Parang ganyan.
Wow.
Okay. Marami pa. Hala, hala, hala. Ito. From Felix Berto Javier, Father James Reuter essay has a chapter in his book, Mama Mary and Her Children, on their experience at the Los Baños prison camp. The officer who oversaw them apparently made a conversion before he was hanged. Wow. Baka that officer was assigned to the Vatican City.
si
Pinagdasal ng
Fad
pinagdasal ng pinagdasal ng mga pare.
Actually, nabasa ko yon. Ang kwento, ang tatay niya ay Amerikano.
Ah,
So
wow.
ang so kinakausap siya ni Reuter parang in a way to practice his English. Tapos when liberation came, saka doon sa soldier na yun nanggaling yung news na parang the Americans are near, so in a few days I will be dead, sabi niya. Sabi daw ni
Mm,
Reuter, oh, no, you just surrender after some few months in prison, you'll be sent back home and see your family. Sabi niya, no, if I surrender and come back home, I will be ashamed to my
mm,
family. So we will die here. And
mm,
true enough, when Los Baños was raided by the Americans, all the Japanese were killed. So he died there.
mm. So, nag-convert mo na pala siya, no?
Mm.
At least nag-convert muna siya kahit papaano meron siyang peace of mind before he died. Ayun, marami ng ito, may mga question pero answered na din yung about the DLSU brothers, no? Yun nga, the Japanese went on a rampage, really, on the last days of the occupation. Monsignor, eto, si Sito Maramba. Si Sito Maramba, marami itong nuggets of knowledge. Bilib na bilib ako sa taong to. Sito, Dr. Maramba says, Monsignor Montini was later elected Pope Paul VI?
Yes.
When was Pope Paul VI? 1960s?
1965, I think, to 1976. Was the first Pope to come to the Philippines.
Oh, really? Oh, I see. So, siya yung sinundan ni Pope John Paul?
May isa pa, John Paul I, who was Pope for 33 days.
Siya yun, yung shortly. Maraming mga conspiracy theories dyan di ba? So, yun. Okay. Another question from Dr. Blas Bermudez. Hi, Doc Blas. Did the Japanese formally apologize to the massacre and atrocities committed against the religious communities in the Philippines?
The Japanese government, no.
Wala, no?
But,
I don't think so.
As a way of reparation, when the Manila Cathedral was rebuilt in 1956, 1957, part of the money came from Japan.
Ay, may question ako, Brother Aaron. So, di ba, the Japanese military administration put up this Catholic section or Catholic unit, di ba? So, medyo may palagay ko unique siya, no? Dahil tayo lang naman yung siguro yung occupied country nila na super Catholic. Hence, they needed to do that, right? But how were the members of the Catholic section treated by the military who were not, by the Japanese military administration and the military people who obviously are not Catholics? How were they treated? Were they like, parang wala lang, ganun? Or may importance din naman sila?
May importance kasi the head was Colonel Narusawa, even if he was not a Catholic. Si Colonel Narusawa, I think, listened to what Monsignor Taguchi recommended. So in fact, may mga instances na halimbawa, may time na gustong-gustong kunin ng mga Hapon yung Ateneo de Manila sa Padre Faura, yung property. So tatawag si Father Hurley kay Bishop Taguchi o kay Colonel Narusawa magsusumbong. O aayusin ni Narusawa para hindi matuloy yung pagkuha. So in that way, helpful sila. Pero minsan, lalo na pag wala physically yung mga taga-Catholic section, Catholic unit, at may nakapaskil lang na poster, wala ring effect.
Like the Japanese can just get any like big convent or ganon for
Usually, sasabihin, at a certain point, nagbigay ng posters kasi yung Catholic section in Japanese, nakasulat doon na this is a Catholic property protected by the Catholic section, etc., etc. So, may times na nire-respect yun, may times na hindi. Pero occasionally, talagang may mga kinukuha. Kasi halimbawa, yung mga Jesuits, 3 beses sila palipat-lipat ng building.
Mainit yung ulo nila sa Jesuits di ba? Because Americans, oo.
Pero ganun din sa Vincentians, kinuha rin for example yung sa Casa Central, yung 2 floors. Yung La Salle College, for a time, they had to bump with the Saint Scholastica Sisters kasi kinuha yung malaking portion ng building. So, well, marami rin naman kasi talagang physical infrastructure, physical plant yung mga Katoliko dahil sa lawak noong network, ng organization. So, talagang malaking possibility makukuha. Pero yun na nga yun yung palaging nangyayari. So kahit na may mga gustong magpatuloy ng apostolate, kung hindi ka nasunugan na bomba, na sequester yung property mo.
Ay, nako. Anyway, ito, medyo lihis tayo ng konti pero related pa rin, of course. Dr. Ricosa is asking, can you mention the other priests or those priests who joined the guerrillas actively? Like Father Haggerty. And ito naman si Vic, may follow-up. Was Piani in contact with the guerrillas?
That I do not know of yet, but I do know that Piani was working with Lulu Reyes of the Chaplains Aid Association, who in some way, bukod sa work nila with prisoners of war, also tried to work with some of the guerrilla units. So
Right.
yun yung we will have to establish it with primary sources, but there is a possibility. Now, in terms of the guerrillas, actually outside Metro Manila, maraming mga clergy na kahit na enemy nationals na hindi na intern kasi nagtago sila sa bundok. So,
Mhm.
uh, Dr. Rico mentioned Father Haggerty. Kaya nakulong si De La Costa at saka si Neri dahil napagbintangan si Neri na siya yung umiikot sa mga guerrilla camp sa Mindanao at si De La Costa yung contact niya sa Manila para mag-report ng movements.
Mm.
But the Jesuits were active in that circle in the Cagayan, Lanao area and Bukidnon. There were, I think, 3 Canadian missionaries in the Davao region who also went with the guerrillas. Sa Antique, meron din ng mga Mill Hill Fathers, no? So there were a number, especially outside Metro Manila.
Very interesting. And very interesting to note, wait, first of all, very interesting to know si Lulu Reyes to. She's one of my favorite World War II heroines. Nobody knows her much, no? But she's the mom of my good friend, Ate Betty Ann. Eh, nasa taga New Jersey yun, kaya baka tulog pa. Ano ko, uy, kasama mami mo sa talk. Anyway, I think she's just a wonderful, wonderful person. In fact, despite all her work for the POWs, for isa yan sa mga unang pumunta ng Kapas, ang lakas ng loob niya, kinausap na yung
Mhm.
Japanese commandant to say na, oh, I will bring aid in medicine and everything, no? Sila ng mga other women's group. But I think Lulu Reyes was really very, ang tawag dito, very much a part of that resistance. And ang nakakatuwa doon, maybe because she's such a nice person, ipamakita mo yung pictures niya, kahit pictures lang niya, parang napakabait na tao kaya
Ang ganda
siguro
ng
hindi siya
aura.
ever nahuli, yeah. And she really has ang tawag ko nga sa kanya, the lady with the big heart. Kasi even after the war, she was really helping people. Very, very nice person talaga. And I think baka nga yung may connection yan sila sa guerrillas through her. Yung sabi mo kanina. Tatanong natin kay Ate Betty Ann. But she was one of my when I talk about the women of the resistance, she's always there because of her work as president of the Chaplains Aid Association. And
Yun yung
ano siya, very active in
mm,
helping the POWs. And openly, ibig sabihin, maybe
yes.
she exuded that character na yung mga Hapon, hindi man siya gagalawin, ganon. Kasi,
Mhm.
yun, basta ganon, nakakatuwa siya. One of my favorite heroines, although hindi siya yung nasa limelight, no? But really, I think a wonderful person.
Mm.
Anyway, speaking of kanina about the churches, no? Mapunta tayo sa after the war. 'Di ba ang daming church properties, especially in Intramuros that,
Mhm.
it's bombed or, sunog. Before being bombed, sinunog na ng mga Hapon, no? Uh,
Yes.
Early February, the Manila Cathedral was, razed to the ground by the Japanese. And very people know this, very few people know this. Akala nila lahat yun, Americans siya.
Amerikano.
Oo. Even before. Santo Domingo was destroyed in early 1941 by
1941.
Japanese. Yeah, Japanese air raids. So, what happened? How was the church able to rebuild physically their churches? Did they get reparation money? Or, from the Japanese or the American side? How was it, Brother Aaron?
Well, a combination of a large part came from mga religious orders rin, kanya-kanyang raise ng funds. Uh,
Mm.
One of the functions of the CWO actually was to help negotiate for a sum to be claimed galing sa Amerika doon sa rehabilitation fund, no? Merong mga napakaraming very bureaucratic yung process, napakaraming mga dokumento, then you have to have all the inventory of what was in your church, down to the upuan, etc., the typewriter, lahat ng nasira, you have to put a fair assessment of everything. And then you have to file it with the CWO who will file it with the United States government. No? Eventually, merong mga nabayaran pero less than one-fourth of the claims. So, yung iba decided that they're better off to move somewhere else. Most of those who were in Intramuros decided to do that. No?
Mhm.
That's why wala na halos na iwan doon except sa Agustin and the Manila Cathedral. I guess also because of the painful memory when most of your confreres were massacred in Intramuros, you don't necessarily want to go back, no? And of course, after the war, nagkaroon na ng squatting problems sa Intramuros. So,
Right.
not the best area to rebuild. But outside Metro Manila, many churches took some time. For example, for ilang years bago na itayo yung Santo Domingo, where the Dominicans eventually left. I think almost 10 years, maybe 8, 9 years. They also had to raise funds from the faithful, from the public. For example, Antipolo Church had a very public fundraising led by Mrs. Quezon to have the Antipolo Church rebuilt after the war. So yun, wala halos from the Americans. Sa Japanese, walang official. Although, as I mentioned earlier, sa Manila Cathedral, several Japanese groups offered a sum of money as their contribution for the rebuilding of the Manila Cathedral, which was rebuilt, ironically, under Archbishop Santos.
Aha. Ay, pabalik tayo. What happened to... Wait, so O'Doherty, he became kinda a little bit nakakalungkot yung kanyang ending, no? But what happened to him right after the war?
He died
Ah,
1948.
ay, ang lapit lang. I
Mm.
see.
So he was replaced by Archbishop Gabriel Reyes, who was Archbishop of Cebu. And Archbishop Reyes died after a year, I think, or a year and a half, parang ganon. Then si Cardinal Santos na.
Oh, I see. So, hindi pala kaagad si Cardinal Santos.
Mm.
I see. Ito, some comments from Melvin Lam. Thank you for your wonderful talk. From Dan Hardiman, thank you for an excellent presentation. From Ricardo Caluen, thank you, Brother Aaron. Very informative lecture indeed. From Tony Ferredo, excellent presentation. Really an eye-opener. Thank you so much. Dami mo ng fans, Brother Aaron!
No, I hope that more people become interested in writing about this particular time kasi
True.
kahit na interesado ako, I can only do so much, no? We really need scholars looking into what happened to the church during World War II. So a very crucial part for the church, no? In the 20th century especially.
Very very interesting talaga kasi like ako I was really surprised when you said 260 plus, no? Na ano lang yun na namatay diretso, and baka meron pang hindi pa na record, 'di ba? Na in the provinces and such. Meron lang akong curious question, Brother Aaron.
Yes.
Why is it that very very few Filipino names, Filipino clergy names pop up as, being executed by the Japanese or helping in the resistance? Is it because of the ratio of, foreign clergymen na mas marami sila than the Filipinos, or I don't know, maybe they were just not resisting enough? Do you have a theory there?
Actually, marami rin naman. Kaya lang kasi, I think, hindi siya lumabas sa listahan ko kasi most of the Filipino priests, for example, lived alone. So, if they were killed, they would have been killed alone.
What do you mean lived alone? Hindi sa kumbento? Paano yun?
Kumbento, wala siyang kasama. Hindi sila grupong namatay.
Dahil more diocesan, is it?
Hindi, kasi usually ang nature ng diocesan priests, ngayon meron ng dalawa meron kang assistant parish priest. Pero generally in the past, you're the only priest in the town. Kasi they cannot afford to send more than one priest because there's simply no available priests. So for example, merong isang pare sa Pangasinan, sa Natividad, Pangasinan na accused na nakipag-collaborate with the guerrillas. Dinala siya sa Fort Santiago. Namatay siya in the process ng pagdala sa kanya sa Fort Santiago. Meron ding isang pare sa Lipa. Sa Lipa kanina, merong 7 diocesan priests na nandun. No? Pero meron ding isa sa Quezon, yung nabanggit dun sa cable ni Monsignor Piani na nabaril lang, nagkamali, na mistaken identity dahil sa makapili. Siya yung tinuro, hindi pa na siya. So, napatay siya ng mga Japanese. So, meron mga ganon. Kaya lang, they tend to be not as popular because again, in terms of scale, kumbaga, pag tinabi mo siya doon sa grupo ng Lasal na automatically 16 silang namatay, parang it pales in comparison. But of course, that does not discount the quality of the martyrdom
Right,
or
right.
heroism of that particular priest.
Correct, correct. Oo. Ito may isa namang question to si Vic. Medyo alam siguro kasi niya na kaya mo 'tong sagutin, no? Your statement that the war quickened the Philippinization of the church, but why did it take more than 20 years after the war to Philippinize the orders and with much difficulty?
Well, because hi Sir Vic, chika tayo mamaya, pero in short, in a nutshell, kasi during the war, kaunti pa yung Pilipinong religious. Kumbaga, for example, in
Oh.
Jesuits na yung pinakamarami, there were about 20 Filipino seminarians pa lang during that time. So, it will take some time, no, to prepare them for positions of leadership, for example. So yung mga SVD, yung meron, yung mga yung mga Jesuits, yung mga CICM, meron din yung mga
I
yun.
see, oo.
So it took them some time, but as Sir Vic mentioned, no, in the 60s and 70s, nagkaroon na ng tension na parang they are treated as second-class citizens. Especially in the older religious orders like the Dominican. Actually, dun sa mga Spanish orders, mas malakas yun eh. Like yung mga Dominicans, Franciscans. There was really parang resistance from the Spanish friars. Meron pa ring ang tawag nila limpieza de sangre kasi daw ang dugo hindi raw puro kaya parang substandard yung pagkapare nung Pilipino. Pero eventually that was overcome kasi there was a Vatican intervention.
Okay. So when
But
you
that's for
say
another story.
oo nga. So ito lang quickly, medyo ignorant question. So when you say Philippinization of the church, does that only apply to the religious orders or pati sa diocesan ba? Medyo
Pati sa
ligaw ako.
diocesan, nahuli lang talaga kasi yung religious orders.
Kasi nga medyo international yung kanyang character. I see. I grew up in a parish where ng Augustinian Recollects. And when I was growing up, my mom was very active, no? Debotong Katoliko. So we were always in church and I was always in the convent and muse nga ako ng mga pari doon dahil chubby, cute ako ng bata. Cute daw ng bata. And I was always there. And halos lahat pa sila nun Spanyol, Brother Aaron. This was in the 70s, early mid-70s. And then eventually, yun nga, ngayon, panay Pinoy na. And we missed them because they were very nice priests. No? Parang nung nag-aaral ako ng No Limitang, hindi naman lahat ng sumoy, mga sila namin pare, ang babait you know, and then, you know, they really prepare for the mass, ang ganda mag-homily, yung ganon, di ba? So, yun lang naman yung aking take doon.
So, maganda rin pag-aralan yan, Sir V, kung interesado ka.
Oo.
Yung naging movement ng mga Filipino ng mga religious who came from prominent families. Kasi merong mga de buena familia na pumasok halimbawa sa Jesuits, sa Augustinian.
May connect.
Ang point nila, aapi-apihin nyo kami, de buena familia kami sa Pilipinas.
In fact, si Guerrero, Maria Guerrero.
Guerrero.
Scion of one of the mga buena familia nga, no? So, kaano sila yun, Maria Guerrero? Cousin?
Parang uncle.
Uncle, I see. So, yun nga, no? Very prominent family yan. Yan, ang dami mong bagong fans, Brother Aaron. From Cito Maramba, Dr. Maramba, thank you, very enlightening. From Diego Almirante, thank you for the very informative lecture. Ito, may isang question si Doc Blas. Did the Catholic Church ever sanction Archbishop Guerrero for his pro-Japanese stance during the war?
I want to find out if that was a sanction, but after the liberation of Manila, he resigned as auxiliary bishop. So, ang gusto kong malaman ngayon, kasi sometimes euphemism yung resignation. Hindi mo alam kung nag-resign talaga or pinag-resign. But the weird thing there is Guerrero was not, during that time, resignation of bishops were unheard of. You died where you are assigned, no? Until death ka, obispo. So, Bishop Guerrero resigned. So, I don't know if that resignation was his own volition or whether he was asked to resign. So we will know for sure in the Vatican archives. But what we do know was that by 1949, he was already rehabilitated enough to have been reappointed to a diocese. He was the first bishop of San Fernando, Pampanga.
Interesting, no? 75 years after the war, marami pang nauungkat. And sabi mo nga, kabubukas lang nung Piani Papers ba, what they call that
Mm,
in the Vatican.
in the
In fact,
Vatican.
Brother Aaron was there a few months ago and yun nga, start ng research niya. And babalik pa siya. Kaya meron pa tayong part 2. Mas marami pa tayong marites.
Mga Marites.
Marami pa tayong malalaman from his, kung kailan babalik ulit si Brother Aaron there. Brother Aaron, Dr. Jose says, great talk. Congratulations.
Thank you, Sir Rico.
Ayun. Ito, what happened to Bishop Guerrero after? Ayun, nabanggit na rin kanina, no? Victor, you're welcome, brother. Mike Banyos from Cagayan says, in hora buena, sa uulitin. All right. Samuel Herbolario, one of our watchers, says, it was not only the Catholic clergy that suffered under the Japanese occupation. 13 American Baptist missionaries were beheaded by the Japanese in Hopevale, yes. Tapas Capiz, yes, in Iloilo. 3 children were bayoneted to death. This tragic incident was later made into a play. It made into a play. So I was able to visit that at se, ano nga yung, I screened honor there at Central Visayas University, but I forgot. Basta yun, there was a
Mm,
memorial there for the Hopevale missionaries. Very, very interesting story also.
mm.
And yun kaninang na-mention ko nga yung mga sa Cosmopolitan Church, Mary Boyd Stagg, and the other Protestant missionaries who worked in, anong hospital ba yun? I forgot. But it's a Protestant hospital, no? Isidro Reyes. Oh, Ate Isidro, hi! Thanks for watching. Ate Isidro is the admin of Manila Nostalgia. Very
Yes, hi, Ma'am
informative and
Sidra.
comprehensive talk. Congratulations. And Dr. Bermudez says, congratulations for a unique and very interesting lecture. Yan, kaya talaga nung pinag-uusapan namin to ni Brother Aaron and I found out this was his thesis. Sabi ko, Brother Aaron, kailangan tayo gumawa ng webinar on this because this is very seldom explored, no? Talagang, bits here and there, but there's no comprehensive, talk on this. Kaya napakaganda ng presentation ngayon. And all of them are still very much, kahit na overtime na tayo,
Overtime
nandito
na
pa
tayo.
sila.
Sorry po, ang haba nung yata.
Ay, nako, ang daming questions pa. Teka ha, medyo parang nag-uuna-una to. Okay. Ricardo Caluan says, recommended film as backgrounder on Vatican politics before and during World War II, Saints and Sinners, the history of the papacy. Uy, maganda yun, ha? Hanapin ko nga yun. Baka meron na sa YouTube. Dr. Jose, Spain broke diplomatic relations with Japan in 1945 after news of the killings in Manila and destruction of churches. Yeah, totoo yan. I think it was just resumed in the 1970s. Oo. Plus, of course, the massacre of the Spanish consulate in the
Yeah.
Spanish consulate. Si Yufi Agbayani is here, is from NHCP.
Hi, Yufi.
I may have missed this part of the presentation, but were the Roman Catholic Church in the Philippines made to join the single church group that the Japanese wanted to make about Filipino Protestant churches? Congratulations. Parang were the Roman Catholic Church in the Philippines made to join the single church group that the Japanese wanted to make about Filipino Protestant churches? Well, the Catholic is single, no? I mean, not unlike the Protestant na maraming
I
sect.
think it helped kasi na from the very beginning, even before the Japanese came, klaro na sa kanila na iba yung way that they will treat the Catholics. Iba yung sa Protestants. Kaya may Catholic section, may Protestant section. So,
May Protestant
may
section
Protestant
din.
section. Meron ding pumuntang mga
Ah.
Japanese na Protestant ministers. So, magkaiba talaga yung approach.
I see. May ganun pala. See, another new learning tonight. Okay, see, Victor says Buttonbrook was allegedly buried alive in the grounds of Christ the King Seminary. Oh my. Ito, si Vic. Ay, Brother Aaron, may ay pa talaga ha, Vic ha. Ay, Brother Aaron, can you double check pala doon sa casualty sa Lipa? The Dominicans were the ones with the lowest casualty and most of them were killed in the bombing of Manawag. And Lipa was not a Dominican enclave. Talaga may part 2 pa tayo.
Tama, Sir Vic. Hindi sila taga-Lipa, pero they just happened to be there when the Japanese started killing people.
Oh
They were
my.
actually from Manila, yung dalawang Dominicans, sila Father Merino.
So parang nadayo lang no. Wrong place at the wrong time, no? Oh
Yes.
my, wow. Cordoba Angelo says, I've heard of this in connection with the Blue Division in Russia. I wonder if the story that claims that Spain wanted to send volunteers to fight the Japanese after the atrocities. Baka ito yung in reply to Dr. Jose's ano that Spain broke
Mhm.
diplomatic ties. Uh, ito, Jordan C is asking, how did the priests deliver their homilies and pastoral letters? Meron ba mga pastoral letters noon?
Meron.
Meron na. Were there cases when homilies and pastoral letters had some political undertones and hidden messages, and how did the Japanese respond? Uy, interesting din to ah. May mga ganyan ba at the time?
Well, they were heavily censored. In the same
Ah,
way that the letters were censored. So, for example, if the bishop will write a pastoral letter and he will have it go around his diocese, that has to go through the censors, mababasa nila. So,
who
that's
is the
why
censor? Not the
mga
Catholic unit.
Japanese,
Oh, mga officers lang.
mga officers lang.
Oh,
Kaya I'm sure they also watch their back. Nag-ingat din sila.
right, right, right. Ito, si Yuffie says, naalala ko po tuloy yung commemoration ng Gumburza execution na ginawa ng Second Republic sa Manila Cathedral noong 1944. Wow, interesting.
O yun,
Triani and Guerrero were featured prominently there, if I remember correctly.
Yuffie,
Ah.
sa'yo galing yung picture. Salamat.
All right. Ito si Vic again. De la Costa had a diary that was eventually lost. It was his diary during the war. He never talked about what happened to him in Fort Santiago. Uy, sayang naman to, no?
Never did.
Sana ano to, mahanap itong diary na to. Maraming sinulat si Labrador, no?
Si
Ah,
Labrador kasi talagang diary format. Talagang everyday yung ano eh.
Everyday.
Mm.
Buti hindi siya nahuli na panahon na yun nagsusulat, ano, kundi lagot siya. Anyway, from Louis Franco, hi Louis, my good friend from California. I admire your candidness as regards the dynamics inside the church. Great. Dami mong bagong fans, Brother Aaron. And Vic says naabutan si Guerrero ng amnesty. Oh, kasi noong 1948 nga, no, nagka-amnesty na. Yeah. Ricardo Coluan is asking, I wonder if the official Catholic Church in the Philippines also addressed the issue of collaboration among its ranks after the war. Did they address that
Wala.
or
Wala. Kasi
wala?
again, very maliit yung population eh.
Mhm. And maybe busy rebuilding or what, no? Kaya ano.
At saka after the
Uh,
war, the problem became how do you deal with the hukbalahap, especially in Central Luzon. So,
yes, yes, yes.
problema rin yung maraming mga parish priests na pinatay yung hukbalahap
All
after the
right,
war.
right, right. You know what, Brother Aaron? Yung itong book ni Lieutenant William Owens, he was a lieutenant in the CIC, no? Parang yun yung predecessor ng CIA. And he was, during liberation, January, February, he was assigned in San Fernando of all places, no? Taas ng leftist movement there. And he became close to the parish priest of Minalin, a Spanish, no?
Mhm.
And very interesting. I'll try to send you a copy of that book.
Eh, sige
And
po.
that parish priest did a lot to save the people also, no? Parang at the same time, natatakot din siya dahil the Hukbalahap was there really to, you know, syempre, medyo communist leanings and siguro
Mm.
wala nang kinikilalang pare or madre, ganyan, di ba? Ay, speaking of madre, Brother Aaron,
Yes po.
so I do talks about the women of the resistance, and I find it really, really hard, except for the Merino sisters, to look for sources about our Filipina nuns and what they did during the war. Would you have any inkling on or any ano on that? Uh, what were their
Well,
activities? Kasi parang din namin mention eh.
most of them were nurses.
Ah,
For example, the RVM sisters, I think, sent about 10 sisters to join the Red Cross to help with nursing.
oh,
As I mentioned earlier, nung nawala yung mga Merinol sisters sa St. Paul Hospital, Filipino sisters from the Daughters of Charity took over. Ganun din sa ibang mga hospitals. Karamihan ng mga hospitals noon ay church-administered eh.
right,
So you
right.
have
Oo.
St. Paul Hospital, for example, in Iloilo. In Manila, you have San Juan de Dios and St. Paul, and then Hospital Espanyol de Santiago sa Makati. So, karamihan doon, either French or Spanish na kaunti na lang by that time, and then Filipino sisters. So, many of
Mhm.
them would be nursing sisters.
I see. It's very quiet, no? Yung kanilang
Mhm.
character, no? They don't, they don't write about it. Magandang ano din yan, ah. Magandang paper din yan, Brother Aaron, no?
Actually,
Kasi, yun nga,
maganda
very, very
tingnan yung
limited.
kung ano yung ginawa ng mga madre nung Liberation of Manila. Kasi imagine mo, you have sisters in charge of wards and wards of patients,
Right,
or
oh.
sisters in charge of the whole hospicio. And hospicio had what, two casualties during the war. Kahit napalipat-lipat sila ng bahay, nakarating sila ng Santa Ana, nakakatakbo sa mga Hapones tsaka sa mga American bombing. So,
Mhm.
in that way, very heroic rin kasi yung tapang nila, and then, not only trying to save yourself but saving all of the people entrusted to your care. I mean,
Right, right, no? At the same time, trying to, ano tawag dyan, trying to keep yourself safe also, no? Dahil yung,
exactly.
I'm sure, rapes and all, ano yun. Ah, oh, Dr. Jose says Bishop Finneman's biography is entitled A Hero Deserving a Halo. Oh, is this a book?
That's a book written by
Oh,
an SVD priest.
I see. Our library should have that. By the way, folks, for those of you interested in doing research, Philwar, our foundation, has a mini library. We have a modest collection of World War II books. So, we're opening naman to students who want to research about World War II, no? Kahit pa paano marami-rami naman. Siguro we have around more than 100 titles purely on World War II. So, we're opening. So, kung yung mga gusto mag-research dyan. Okay. Eto. Dami pang, comments. Pasensya na ha. OT na tayo. OT. uh, ito, ayun, may nag-comment na rin si Father de la Costa, wrote a journal but was lost. Francis Neri, hi, Colonel Neri to. Good evening, everybody. I assume there are books written about the Catholic Church's activities during the Japanese occupation. Yung kay Terada ba, ano?
Kay Terada chapters. There are two,
Chapter ng book nila ni Dr. Jose,
yung book nila
right?
ni Dr. Jose tsaka nung late wife ni Dr. Jose. Meron pa sa
Yeah,
isang libro.
the
So,
Japanese the Philippines during the Japanese occupation,
yes.
that
Tsaka
book.
yung The Philippines Under Japan.
Right, right, right.
Mhm.
It will soon be available to for our online selling. We're talking to the press to have that available again.
Yay.
Yung book si Dr. Isa, yung and Ma'am Lydia. Kalimutan ko yung title, Philippines during the Japanese occupation,
Mm.
no? Yun. And then, at Isidro is saying, on another note, I recall reading about the miracle which occurred at the San Miguel Parish Church during the Battle of Manila, when then parish priest Vicente Reyes pointed an image of Saint Michael the Archangel towards the direction of flames which threatened to engulf the district of San Miguel. Miraculously, the flames receded and spared the district of San Miguel from destruction.
Yeah,
Aliw,
that's
no?
that's an oral history na hanggang ngayon ano pa. Popular
Really?
sa San Miguel. I used to live there eh. Hanggang ngayon ano nila
Ah,
'yon.
talaga? So, tapos Saint Michael, San Miguel din, no? Oo nga pala. And then yung sa Santa Ana Church, meron din yan eh, yung Liberation, kalimutan ko. But parang meron din yan, parang ganun eh. May mga myth din. May mga hindi myth, but yung oral histories about yung church being spared from Japanese,
One of
uh,
the few. Some of the
oh,
few.
ayun. Mike Mapas, a very interesting question. After the war, what happened to the Japanese clergy that arrived to push Japanese propaganda and assist the JMA?
Many of them went back to Japan, December 1942, including Taguchi. Some of the seminarians stayed here. Si Ikeda naging pare. He studied in the USC Central Seminary along with the two Salesian seminarians who were staying with Piani naman during that time. But yun na nga, nung parating na yung mga Amerikano, na draft back yung dalawa. Yung isa, nagka-tuberculosis, dinala sa San Juan de Dios kung saan siya namatay.
Si Ikeda in
Si
battle.
Ikeda, ang hindi ko sure. Si Sir Vic ang Sir Vic, what happened to Ikeda? Chat ka.
Vic, pachat, Vic. Pero ang sad, no? It was called back to action. Okay. And then Dr. says there is a published oral history of Father Reuter along with another priest also incarcerated in Los Baños. Oh, interesting. Very interesting. Sir Rico, pa-chat. Saan namin ito mahahanap? Ricardo Caluma says there were a few families living in the vicinity of De La Salle who also sought refuge in the family and a number of the members died within the brothers. True, true, true. Mga buena familia ng Malate, nagtakbuhan doon.
Correct.
Especially those who were sending their kids there.
Mhm.
So, medyo naging takbuhan nila yan. Vic says Cosgrave wasn't killed. He was in La Salle because the brothers were not allowed to celebrate Mass. And if I remember right, Vic, di ba you told me Cosgrave was an Australian? Tama ba?
Irish.
Irish. But he was found in Australia after the war. Parang may PTSD, something like that.
Kasi yung actually ano yan there are two groups of redemptorists in the Philippines. The Cebu all came from Ireland and Baclaran all came from Australia.
Ah,
So ngayon si Cosgrave found himself in Manila.
okay.
Lahat ng kasama niya Australia na intern. But even
Oh.
before they were intern, they were living already in La Salle kasi their house is too near the airbase.
Mhm, mhm. Nikos.
Baclaran.
Oo.
Kaya they had to move elsewhere. They went to the Lasal brothers, which was a perfect arrangement because as Sir Vic said, wala kasi nagmimisa sa mga brothers. So Father Cosgrave became their chaplain.
I see.
And
Oo.
eventually all the 12 other Australian redemptorists were brought to Los Baños. Si Cosgrave yung naiwan.
I remember parang after the war daw, he's found in Australia, tapos severe PTSD, ganyan. Eh, kasi naman he saw how the brothers were massacred. Na-save lang siya, parang he hid behind the altar ba? Or
At
basta
the back
parang,
of the altar, tas drinking
oo,
water from the flower vase.
oo, yun. So yun. But the rest were killed, no? And then Victoria said, I met Father Chikamoto in 1995. Wow.
Parang
Uh,
he was given an award here
for what?
uh, for helping Catholics during the war.
Ah, okay.
Kasi he was trying, yun naman parang kahit na alam nilang propaganda yung role nila, parang I felt naman, I think based sa mga nababasa ko that their intention to make things easier for the Catholics naman was genuine.
Mhm, mhm. Yes. And then Glenn Delgo is asking, were there any accounts of Japanese soldiers confessing to the Filipino priests their war atrocities? Like yung mga Japanese soldiers who felt sudden regret of their war actions and decided to convert to a new leaf. Were there a lot of Catholic uh, army people, Japanese people?
We wouldn't know kasi confession is
Oo
secret.
nga.
But what I know is that there was this one Columban priest, si Father Douglas, who was assigned in Pililla, was arrested because he refused to say to the Japanese soldiers the confession of a person that they suspected was a guerrilla. So
Ah,
kaya siya inaresto, tinorture, tapos nung wala talaga makuha, nawala na lang,
oh
he
man.
assumed that he was killed.
These heroes deserve to be ano din ano. Tama ka nga kanina said we have honored the veterans, we have honored the other war heroes, pero yung sa clergy wala pa no. Oo. Yun. Siguro yung closest na nakita ko was in the yun nga, yung Malate Church, they have the museum and they have like a parang yung memorare Manila namin sa Intramuros. They have a smaller one like that to
Yeah.
honor also those civilians who were killed inside the church. Yun. Ate Isidra says the San Miguel Parish survived intact and became the pro-cathedral after the destruction of the Manila Cathedral. Father Vicente Reyes later became Auxiliary Bishop of Manila, then Bishop of Borongan, Samar, and Cabanatuan, Nueva Ecija. Uy, dyan ako kinumpil, tsaka binaptay sa San Miguel. Nakita ko yung aking baptismal certificate. So is this Father Vicente Reyes, siya yung naging, ano natin?
Bishop.
Siya yung Reyes na after ni...
No, iba po.
Iba. Okay. Can we have a copy of the presentation for educational purposes if it's okay? Well, it's recorded. It's in our ano. So anytime you want to go back to it po, you can. Carlos Palad say, thank you for the very informative talk, Brother Aaron.
Hi, Kuya Carlos.
Kamusta po? And then Colonel Neri, Ma'am Des, may I also request a copy of tonight's presentation? It's recorded. It's in our Facebook page. So anytime you want to go back. Brother Aaron, ha? Dami mong fans, ha? Ayun, Dr. says, ayun, Central Philippine University, the university that
Yung
where
home
I went.
base.
Yung pala yun. Right. Melvin says, nice, very informative talk. Thank you. And AE says, Central Philippine University, Iloilo City yan. Alam kasi nila na makakalimutin ako. Kaya, kaya sinachat na nila. Yuffie says, publication of this when?
Babalik
Congratulations.
muna ako ng Vatican.
Ah,
Kailangan kong upuan yung mga piani papers.
oo nga.
That's the
Kaya ka pala
recent
tumagal-tagal
part.
dun, ha? Nag-research ka pa, ha? Ito. Hala, hindi kaya sinadya ng Vatican na dalhin si Guerrero sa San Fernando kasi nga maraming hook sa Pampanga. Hula lang. but the other people says he was well loved, no?
Yeah.
Maybe because of his, you said kanina, diba, he lived in, he doesn't mind living in poverty despite the fact na, he was raised marangya, buena familia, no? Maybe they saw his, that character of his.
Mainhin nga daw siya eh. Sobrang, he's not someone that you'd expect na sanay sa lifestyle ng mga buena familia or someone who has that power in society. So, hindi siya threatening in short. At least from what I read sa mga recollections ng tao sa kanya.
Oo nga, no? Right smack doon siya nilagay sa Pampanga. Baka kaya rin siya nilagay doon because of that character of his, no? Yeah, malalaman mo yan pagbalik mo sa Vatican. Ayun, ito, magandang question. How are the orphanages in connection with the churches at that time? Tama, di ba? Halos lahat yan run by the religious.
Tuloy pa rin.
Oo. And di ba ano ba yung orphanage na dyan nagtago yung Spanish Consul General nung time yun or pumunta siya dun eh. Kaya na-spare siya. Oh my God, ito na naman me and my memory.
In Manila.
Sa Manila. So, he went there for a while.
Or baka yung hindi Catholic, hindi church-run orphanage sa may Paco, yung hindi Gota de Leche. What's the name of that?
Makalimutan ko. Pag maalala ko yan mamaya. Maalala ko yan mamaya. The Spanish Consul General din. Actually, medyo hindi siya type ng Spanish community noon dahil sabi, pro-Franco. Forgot his name. Pero yung apo niya, I was able to invite his grandson during the 75th Battle of Manila seminar that we had. And very interesting, very interesting. Parang, yun nga, nakwento niya na his grandfather went to this Spanish run or maybe religious run orphanage. Kaya na-spare siya dun sa carnage sa Spanish consulate. Tapos pagbalik niya, yun, patay na lahat ng tao except for that one little girl who survived it.
Pero speaking of Franco, Ma'am Des, segue lang, confirm to ni Sir Vic, ang mga pare na Dominican sa USC during the time was pro-Franco.
Oo, totoo yan.
Honorary, ano ba yung binigay sa kanya? Honorary chancellor ba? Or
ang ganun, oo. May ganyan rin akong nabasa. Totoo yan. Ay, ito na yung sagot ni Vic. Ikeda was killed by guerrillas in Rizal. Gera hindi naman siguro alam ng mga guerrilla natin. But hindi labanan sa Rizal, the Antipolo Church, that's why, sabi mo kanina, si Madam Quezon was very pushing for the restoration of the church, but hindi labanan doon. In fact, pati di ba may story doon yung si Our Lady of Antipolo, that image.
Parang nilibing nila.
Parang ganun, may story yan. Dr. Jose would know, nakwento niya sa akin dati yan. And then Dr. says, the Father Reuter oral history is short but important. Mike Honorato interviewed him as part of a series of oral histories. Ooh, interesting. Dr. says, by the way, Takefumi Terada is attending this from Tokyo.
Oh, wow. Hello, sir.
Hello, sir. He says it's very good and well-researched. Wow, Brother Aaron.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you.
Sobrang touching po yun kasi yung mga papers ni Dr. Terada, yung missing key sa akin kasi I don't read Japanese, so I would have to rely on somebody who writes about the topic and understands the primary sources. So coming from him, that means a lot. Salamat po.
Thank you, Mr. Terada. And in fact, I saw the paper of Aaron. He really cited Mr. Terada's work there. Oo. Ayun, sabi ni Vic, Terada has a lot of research on this. He interviewed 3 of the seminarians who survived the war. Oh, wow. 3? So, sinong seminarians to, Vic? Pinoy? Di ba namatay yung 2? Baka Pinoy.
Parang
close to the Japanese.
5 yata sila or 6. 6 na Japanese.
Oh, so he was able to interview the 3 who survived. Wow.
And speaking of research, kasi Sir Vic din i-acknowledge ko kasi siya yung nagsulat ng tungkol dun sa mga nangyari sa Poor Clares. I
Mm.
was not successful, Sir Vic, to get a copy of the primary source sa mga mongha eh. So kung meron
Mhm.
ka pa, photocopy po.
Yung sa Santa Clara
Sa
na
Santa
mga
Clara.
ano. Ano ang
Maybe,
anong storya dun during the war, yung mga sisters sa Santa Clara?
hindi talaga sila lumalabas. Andun sila until they were bombed.
Oh, yung dito na ba yan Santa Clara sa QC? Is that the
Hindi
one?
po, sa Intramuros, near Fort
Intramuros.
Santiago. In
Ah,
fact, when one of the Franciscans got out of the air raid shelter kung saan binomba lahat ng kalalakihan ng Intramuros, one of them went to Santa Clara to ask for water. But sabi ng mga madre, alis ka kasi baka makita ka ng mga Japanese soldiers. So throughout the war, they kept their enclosure. Pero they were hit by an American bomb and 10 sisters died. So
hmm,
afterwards, they become nomadic for a while until they got the property in Katipunan.
mhm.
Tapos pinalipat na naman sila sa likod kasi ginawang expressway, nagka-flyover. So they had to demolish the original convent there and move to the back.
I see. Nung panahon ba ng giyera, nagdo-donate na yung mga tao ng itlog sa kanila?
I think.
Really? Practice na rin talaga. Nakakatuwa naman. Anyway, ito pa, ang daming comment pang bago. Dr. says, I think some members of the clergy were awarded the Medal of Freedom after the war.
And
Wow.
even sisters po, the
Oh,
directress of one hospital who was a St. Paul sister received
a Medal of
the Medal
Freedom.
of Freedom for
Oh,
her
you
work.
know what? Si Dr. Blas Bermudez collects medals and yung mga ganyan, and he's very good on it. Baka you can share with us, Dr. Blas Bermudez, if you know of the clergy people who were awarded. He's very good, alam niyan. Actually, he knows the medals that were given to Lulu Reyes, and he explained to
Mm.
me after the war, hindi lang Medal of Freedom, may iba pa. And Dr. Blas was the one that explained to me. Parang may order pa, parang ganun eh.
Actually, speaking of Lulu Reyes, I forgot to mention kanina, no? Parang it's good also to remind historians, especially those who are interested in church history, not to forget the work of non-priests and non-sisters, no? When we refer to church history. Kaya I was very particular, I had to mention Lulu Reyes kasi she identified herself very well with the church eh. And during that time,
Mm.
syempre, ang dami ring contributions. For example, ng mga Catholic Women's League na naiwan, yung mga Knights of Columbus, and like si Lulu Reyes was a lady of charity. So maganda rin to consider that they have their own contributions and not only that of the institutional or hierarchical church.
Right. Oo. Very well said. Eto, it was sabi ni Vic, it was Ikeda who ordered that the Antipolo lady be taken out of Antipolo. So, doon ba siya, Vic, sa Antipolo lumaban? Ganyan? Baka, no? Yung
Baka
3 Japanese seminarians, they went missing after the war. Oh, and then Mr. Jordan says the original image of Our Lady of Antipolo was brought from the altar to Colaike Hills, then to Quiapo. There, the sacristan mayor and devotos traveled from Antipolo to Quiapo by foot. Alam mo, interesting din yung ano na yan, yung labanan din sa Antipolo. Vic says, kinain ng anay yung photocopied memoirs ko nung Santa Clara Records.
sayang.
Nga. But where did you photocopy this from, Vic? Yon, no? Para magkaroon tayo ulit ng kopya. Ayan, may sagot na si Dr. Blas Bermudez. I think Father de la Costa and Lulu Reyes were awarded the U.S. Medal of Freedom. Yeah, they were. Si Tita Lulu, yes. Oo, very good. And so, wow, super overtime. My gosh, almost 3 hours. This is one of the longest webinars we've ever had, which really means that people are very interested in this topic, and talagang kailangan natin magka-part 2. And thank you, Brother Aaron, for imparting your knowledge in this. And as you can see from the comments of these people, and many of our watchers are really World War II history buffs and World War II experts. So for them to say that this is a good talk is really not just a pat on the back, but a laurel on on your head. So thank you
Maraming
so much
salamat
all
po.
for watching. Thank you so much, Brother Aaron, for sharing this with us, and
Thank you.
more power as you go back to Vatican and research for more. And I'm really, really interested and really, really, ano tawag dyan, looking forward to, what you'll get from the records there. And so, thank you so
Yun yung
much.
for part 2.
Yeah, yeah, may part 2 tayo. Thank you so much, everybody, for staying with us. It's almost 11. Thank you so much. But before we go, we have a few announcements. So for our next episode, that will be tentatively on December 3rd. And this will be our last hurrah for the year. This is our episode 12 of the 2022 World War II lecture series. Di ako pa rin makapaniwala na patapos na yung 2022. And our topic is very contentious 1946 Rescission Act. Our speaker will be Dr. Chris Capozzola from the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology History Department, and he will be talking about this. He released a book, Bound by War. It's very interesting because it shows how the Filipinos and Americans were bound by war. So we'll have more of this. This will be tentatively on December 3rd. Please tune in and like our Facebook page so you'll know of notices and our announcements for this webinar. And I think this is a very good ending to our 2022 World War II lecture series because until now that's a very contentious topic and has been a bone of contention for many years between our two countries. No? Thank you very much. And please check our Facebook page. Ang dami po nagtatanong about World War II books where they can buy. So we are selling online a lot of World War II titles. And please check our Facebook page. Tayo lang po yung nagkikerry ng ganyang karaming World War II titles. So for those of you, I know all of you are interested in this, so please check out our FB page and please patronize and buy because the little income that we get from selling these books help us in doing this advocacy. Nagkakaroon tayo ng seminars, nagkakaroon tayo ng exhibits, and your purchase help us a lot. So please, and aside from that, you learn pa from the books, diba? So please like our Facebook page to get our announcement. So this ends our episode 11 on behalf of the Philippine World War II Memorial Foundation or Philwar and Filipino American Memorial Endowment or FAME. We'd like to thank Brother Aaron for spending his Saturday night with us. Ang haba-haba. Naku, parang may mga dumadagdag pa, Brother Aaron. Ipi-PM ko na lang sa'yo mamaya. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. And we'll see you December 3rd for episode 12. And stay safe and good night. Thank you, everybody. Bye.